Chapter 921. But this time, there's something fishy. If the Buddhist sect had invited the side sects to participate, they would have sent the invitation directly to Yaoing, and it would be up to you to decide whether to go or not. But the one they sent you was not an invitation, but a message. In other words, it was the Tao lineage that requested you to go, but you can't make the decision yourself. Once the message is sent, you can't reject it unless there's something special? Lu Xiaoyi still wanted to act shamelessly. What do you mean by something special? The old Taoist master chuckled. For example, if I kill you now, that would be called a special. Lu Xiaoyi laughed dryly. What you mean is, although this Buddhist assembly is a fixed event, it might also be used to resolve the disputes between Buddhism and Taoism that have been getting more and more intense in recent years. Taoist Master Mao looked at him. This macaque, nothing could be hidden from him. Previously, he was just playing dumb with him. The disputes between Taoism and Buddhism are secretive but not public. It's like a deep pool of water where the fishes fight happily, but they never show it on the surface. But in recent years, there was the heaven and earth chess game of Yaoing, the hidden killing intent of Taisu, and the subtle targeting of the Shaolin. In the long run, the differences between Taoism and Buddhism will be magnified, bloody, and public. It's not a good thing for anyone. Therefore, this Yulon Buddhist assembly is an excuse for both sides to sit together and negotiate, control their emotions, and regulate their actions. This is the wish of both sides, and they hit it off immediately. That's why Eugene Dan stage cultivators have to go as well. Those people are also making a move in the Taipu realm. And you, every time, you're the main force in causing trouble. Every time, you don't pull back and fight to be the first. Others can choose not to go, but you can't not go. Is it a joint hearing of the three sects? Lu Xiaoyi's face turned bitter. He really had a bad premonition, and this time, it was not a subconscious act of fooling around. In Jin Dan, there were not many things that could cause a cultivator to be impulsive. Usually, it was related to one's own foundation, life, path, and future. His intercepted luck group now was completely different from when it was first formed, and his ability was naturally different from before. But ever since he formed the pill, he had never felt so strongly. Even when the perfected Yuanying forced his memories back in the sea of clouds outside Red Hill, he did not feel any real danger. However, it was different this time. That was a very real feeling, an unmistakable ominous feeling. What was waiting for him? He didn't know. He only vaguely felt that it wasn't entirely a matter of his own life. There was something different. It was very special and inexplicable. How could he not go? Of course not. This was not the dome, nor was it Shao Mountain. If he wanted to survive here, he could only face it head-on. There was no room for retreat. Otherwise, he would be despised by both Taoists and Buddhists at the same time. Furthermore, he had over 100 swordsman brothers. His future was their future. Just leave? Where should he go? Drilling through space cracks? I'll go to 1,000 Buddhas for a drink and see if I can get to know 1 or 2 beautiful nuns. You guys can take care of your own matters. Whether you want to practice swordsman or go out to flirt, I don't care. Decide for yourselves. Xia nodded solemnly. We're not kids anymore. We've been in the cultivation world for hundreds of years. We know what's important. In the past, when these people killed people and caused trouble, they knew to find a place to hide for a few years. How can they retreat now? The matter of Upper Forest has not been resolved yet. Hundreds of Jin Dan and a Yuanying, this debt can't be written off just like that. We all understand. Sword Master, you can go in peace. It's fine even if you enter the nunnery to sharpen your sword. Xia was steady and had a good reputation among the swordsmen. Lu Xiaoyi was not worried. It was just that after being with him for so long, his words were a little strange. What did he mean by sharpening his sword? Did he think he was stupid? He didn't drag his feet and just left. There was no point in waiting here. If he couldn't settle down, he might as well go back to Shaoyao Mountain to inquire about the news and find something to do. After hundreds of years of cultivation, this was the first time that he couldn't calm down. What earth-shattering event was waiting for him? Moreover, at his level, he couldn't bear too big a burden. He couldn't even go out of the universe. The only good news was that he was able to meet Qin Xian. At least they could help each other. In his hundreds of years of cultivation, he had never had the thought of relying on others. No matter how difficult the situation was, he would always face it alone. What was going on this time? In the Great Freedom Hall, Lu Xiaoyi and Jinren Zhao sat opposite each other. Xiaoyao Tur, led by Bai Mei Yangshan, there will be 5 Supremes, 12 Yuanying, and 1 Jin Dan. Aren't you excited that everyone is revolving around you? Lu Xiaoyi put on a fake smile. How can I be? I'm just carrying bags, carrying water, and acting as a pimp. It's just that there are too many ancestors. I'm afraid it's not easy to serve them. Jinren Zhao laughed and scolded. You can only cause trouble. Wherever you go, you'll bring disaster. My tens of thousands of years of tranquility in Xiaoyao Tur was actually pulled into a whirlpool by a small Jin Dan. You should be proud. Lu Xiaoyi was careful. Martial uncle, was it like this in the past? Jinren Zhao became serious. For tens of thousands of years, the Buddhist Yulan Buddhist Assembly and my Xiaoyao Tur have always had 1 supremacy and 2 yuanying. A supremacy is just a yinshin. It's a matter of giving face. So, what do you think? Lu Xiaoyi was very surprised. This is a coincidence. Is everyone very free? What about the other Taoist sects? Jinren Zhao didn't smile. He stared at him. I'll only say one. Qingwei Immortal Sect has always been the leader of Taoism. It has always sent 2 Supremes to participate in the Buddhist Assembly. This time, it sent 9 Supremes. It's also led by Yangshan. When the wind blows, there's bound to be a trace. Lu Xiaoyi was a little uneasy. He had created some stories in the dispute between Buddhism and Taoism, becoming the most unstable part of the Zhou-Xian upper realm. But it shouldn't have attracted the attention of these great cultivators, right? It was a little too much. His little heart thumped. If you say it like that, this disciple really can't bear it. Is there no other reason? For example, the 10,000 Buddhas marrying off their daughter? Jinren Zhao glared at this nonsensical thing. I don't know either. It's just that I've been feeling uneasy recently, but I don't know where the trouble came from. Where did the omen come from? Recently, you've been jumping the happiest in Xiaoyao Tur. Lu Xiaoyi cried out. Jumping the happiest may not be the true source. Martial uncle, the ones you really have to be careful of in the cultivation world are those who are evil. Jinren Zhao waved his hand. Go, just wait. The cultivators who are going to the Yulan Buddhist Assembly this time are all top cultivators with powerful strength. Even I don't have the qualifications to go. But you don't have to worry. With so many Taoist great cultivators going, your little life won't be a problem at all. At most, you'll be pulled out and criticized as a warning to others. Lu Xiaoyi left resentfully, but he wasn't frightened by Jinren Zhao. With so many great cultivators going together, even if he, Lu Xiaoyi, was really unpardonably evil, for the sake of Taoism's face, these great cultivators would definitely ensure his safety. But why did Jinren Zhao also feel uneasy? Inferring from this, was it because everyone felt uneasy, so they formed a team to go to the 10,000 Buddha continent? Was it because the source of the unease was there? Chapter 922. Lu Xiaoyi had nothing to do on Xiaoyao Mountain. He didn't even have someone to talk to. Senior Kawa wasn't on the mountain, and Fan Tong and the others had gone to the outer land. He really didn't know many of the remaining people. He couldn't settle down to cultivate. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't be able to break through the late Jin Dan, let alone in this state of absent-mindedness. This wasn't right. It was as if his feeling was stronger than the others. At the very least, it was stronger than Taoist Master Zhao's. He knew that he had hit the invisible wall of Dan Qi's emptiness. In other words, although his Jin Dan wasn't full yet, the Jin Dan itself believed that it was already in a state of overflowing. It couldn't hold any extra. This emptiness state was the most difficult stage of Jin Dan. For some people, it didn't exist, but for others, it was difficult to cross. In the cultivation world, there were no specific methods to deal with this. There were no corresponding techniques, pills, or tools to help. This was because this was actually a subconscious spiritual category. To solve it, only the cultivator could think of a way. At this time, the elders would often advise the Jin Dan to travel around the world to broaden their minds, experience the world of mortals, and experience life and death. There were all kinds of stimulating methods. There were no precedents, and it was determined by the person. The only guidance was to not be deliberate. Don't learn from others. Only by forgetting your own emptiness barrier could you overcome it. Forgetting? Easier said than done. He decided to find something for himself to do. Although it was less than 3 months, there was still enough time for him to travel between the continents. Although Taoist Master Zhao was somewhat dissatisfied and thought that he should stay in Shaoyao Mountain and wait, because of the philosophy of Shaoyao travel, he couldn't stop the disciples from living normally. After stipulating that he couldn't go to the other continents, he still agreed to his request. Half a month later, he appeared at the mountain gate of Huangting Taoism. This was his first time here. Among all the Taoist sects, he had the deepest connection with the Yellow Court. In the Yuanan Palace Hall of Huangting Taoism, which was used to receive outsiders, he handed over his Shaoyao knot. Jin Dan, who was sitting in the hall, immediately stood up when he saw this. A person's name was like a tree's shadow. In the upper realm of Zhou Xian, Jin Dan's single ear had almost become a legend. Senior Marshal Brother Shan, what brings you here? Was he looking for someone? Or on official business? I, your junior brother, have admired senior brother's great name for a long time, so I definitely won't dare to slight you. After some pleasantries, the Golden Hall Realm cultivator entered the main topic. It's a private matter. I am an old friend of your sect's senior sister Xia Bingji. I hope you can let me visit you. The meaning behind the Golden Hall Realm cultivator's words was deep. Senior sister Xia, there are too many cultivators from the outer Dao that want to be friends with her, but who is truly able to fulfill their wish? What old friend? Isn't he just attracted by her reputation? In Huangting Taoism, there were many cultivators that came rashly like this. Senior sister usually found it difficult to even see her own family, let alone outsiders. Under normal circumstances, it would be fine to directly refuse this type of person. But the single ear of Xiaoyao Swim wasn't an ordinary Jin Dan. Up until now, it wasn't excessive to say that it was the #1 pill in Zhou Xian, right? This was the benefit of reputation. The Golden Hall Realm cultivator sent out a letter, and in less than 10 minutes, a letter was sent back. That cultivator was extremely apologetic. Senior Marshal Brother Shan, I've disappointed you. Senior Sister Xia is in seclusion at Jade Cliff and has already died. What do you think? Dying was the karma of the mortal world. No matter how unrelated it was, it naturally wasn't intentionally targeted at him. It was the self-encouragement of cultivators to break through to the realm of absolute death, and it was also a type of attitude. Either die or yuaning. Otherwise, all sorts of things in the mortal world would be fated, and it would be death closed-door cultivation. Xiaoyao Swim also had a similar saying, and he had long heard of it. Under this kind of situation, even if the sky fell, it wasn't good to disturb, because it meant that you might affect a cultivator's future. Feeling a little sentimental, he took out a ring. There are some old things of Senior Sister here. When Senior Sister comes out, please pass them to her. The Golden Hall Realm cultivator received it with a serious expression. I won't pass them to you. Even Yuanan Hall has records of this kind of artifact, so there's no possibility of losing it or forgetting it, unless she died. This Golden Hall Realm cultivator could also be considered to have seen that this Xiaoyao single ear probably really had an old relationship with Senior Sister Xia. However, as a gatekeeper, he had no way of knowing how old the relationship was. Since she was truly an old friend and not a womanizer, he naturally respected her even more. Lu Xie sighed. The things in the spatial ring were things that Xia Bingji had pawned when little Lu and Sir Rust were living in poverty. Xia Bingji left in a hurry, probably because she was afraid that he would catch up to her at that time, so she didn't have time to redeem them. These things had always been in his own immortal's cave on Xiaoyao Mountain, and they weren't by his side when he met Yaoing last time, so he had nothing to return. But now, he should give them to her. Then, is fellow Taoist Yinya here? I have an old relationship with her as well. I heard that she's injured and hasn't come to visit for such a long time, so I feel guilty in my heart. Please help me notify her. Taoist Huang Ting was secretly astonished. Not bad. Not only is this senior brother Shan's sword technique extraordinary, his method of making friends is extraordinary as well. He didn't miss a single one of the two most beautiful flowers in the Golden Hall realm? Senior brother, please wait a moment. He sent out a letter once more, yet he was truly unable to restrain the questions in his heart and started to beat around the bush. Lu Xiaoyi had a good temper as well, and he played it down. It was a matter of a few tens of years ago. At that time, the two of you were still working in the small front court, and you had an intersection when dealing with a theft case. Taoist Huang Ting came to a sudden understanding. This was indeed a matter that was relatively long ago. Since they were able to wait so long before coming to visit, their relationship was probably not as he imagined. Has the great thief been caught? Not yet. This person was cunning, and later on, he became a friend. In next to no time, an express letter was sent back. The Taoist was very happy as well, because it was good news this time. Senior brother Shan. If senior sister Yin has something to say, let's meet at the Green Seedling Nursery. I will lead the way for senior brother. The Green Seedling Nursery was the private property of the Yin family of Huangting Taoism. Normally, they wouldn't meet outsiders here. To be able to receive an invitation meant that they had a close relationship. When Lu Xiaoyi walked in, he only felt that his breathing had become lighter. In the thick spiritual vigor, there was also a trace of thriving vitality mixed in. There were all kinds of green seedlings here. When they grew to a certain extent, they would be moved to the field to be sown. The entire nursery was like a thick layer of green carpet. It was pure green without a trace of other colors. From afar, there were only 2 or 3 small wooden houses dotting the nursery. Because of the entanglement of the vines, the wooden houses couldn't be seen in their original color, as if they were green bulges. Occasionally, green kingfishers would fly by and peck at the green flesh worms. Their eyes were filled with green as if they reflected the sky green. Silence was the main tone of this place. In such an environment, it wasn't good to casually use divine sense to explore. If he accidentally saw a few female farmers bathing, it would be troublesome. However, he wasn't a quiet person, and he wouldn't become quiet just because it was quiet here. Instead, he raised his voice. A duck. Your brother heir is here, and you still haven't served me with good wine and meat. Your place is really not that good. I'm afraid that if I stay here for too long, even my hat will be dyed green. Lu Xiaoyi thought for a moment. I've heard of this cultivation method before. But didn't they need to become husband and wife first before beheading? I think it's useless even if you do it now, because there are no emotions at all, so how can you be heartless? Cruel? What was so cruel about it? I've only lost a tree, but I still have the entire forest. Yinya looked at him in a daze and sighed in her heart. Her emotion-severing technique was a very special Great Tao technique. It was not the mainstream cultivation method of the Huangting Taoism, but because of her extremely special soul constitution, the ancestor had specially found this cultivation method for her. This was a good thing, but the problem was that she needed to find a medium that could be used to sever her emotions. She could not just make up the numbers, nor could she deliberately seek it out. She had searched for hundreds of years without finding it, but she finally found it one time when she was catching a bandit. There were many times when she had almost given up on her own cultivation method, just to enjoy the emotions that were hard to come by as a human. But she had persevered. She had not gone to the shadow-shaking realm for decades, to the place where he was the local tyrant. But this was still not enough. She had not truly severed that last bit of attachment, so she still could not break through to the next realm. Go find him? Or continue to wait? She had been hesitating this entire time. She was worried that if she really went out, she would never be able to come back. She was worried that she would be able to face the life that would make her blood boil with passion with him. She had someone she loved and exciting experiences. In front of these things, was it really that important whether or not she could achieve the so-called Great Tao? While she was struggling, this person had finally come, giving her the chance to make a final decision. Duo, what kind of person are you? Do you care about me? If it's possible, will you marry me? Lu Xiaoyi also looked at her and said seriously. I care. Of course I'll marry you. But that doesn't mean that I won't help those women who have lost their way in the future. Enya was speechless. One air. You actually dare to talk about such filthy things in such a dignified manner. You don't have the slightest bit of guilt. Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. You said that you wanted to hear the truth. Let me tell you a secret. As a man, my words are the voice of all men. No matter what they say, what they think in their hearts is the same as what I say. Enya stared at him. If Sister Bing were to do it, would you be the same? Lu Xiaoyi did not evade her gaze. It would be the same no matter who it is. Even if she's a real fairy. For men, whether they're beautiful or ugly, fat or thin, good or bad, it doesn't matter. The key is that what you haven't tasted before is the best. Enya sighed. I know that you want to help me sever my emotions. But the more you do this, the more I can't sever them. Duo, can I go with you? Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Welcome. But we need to establish a blood connection, right? You know that I like to fight. Danger is always around me. With your Lotus Bridge, it's more convenient for me to escape. Enya's eyes turned even more blurry. Duo, you always say things like that, as though you are the worst person in the world. But I know that's not the case. What you say is different from what you think in your heart. You want to help me, but the more you do this, the more it messes up my heart. The two of them repeated the endless emotional game that had been played since the beginning of the human race. The more shameless and disgusting Lu Xiaoyi was, the more reluctant Enya was to let him go. This was the biggest problem in the depths of her soul, a perverted reverse psychology. The Yin family's young god ancestor had probably seen through this, which was why he let her practice the emotion-severing cultivation technique. This was a decision to put her in a desperate situation. If not, Jean Dan would be Enya's iron top. A day later, the teary-eyed Enya had almost completely given up on her cultivation problem. She was focused on starting a new life. She wanted to be a husband and wife, be in love with each other, and grow old together. She stood up. Because of her absent-mindedness, she became a little weak. She looked at Lu Xiaoyi affectionately, and said softly, I've decided. You can go. I want to sever my emotions and break through to the next realm. Lu Xiaoyi smiled and left. He did not say anything else. After this day, he was exhausted. It was even more tiring than Yuanying, who created this cultivation technique. He was so bored that his head hurt. Did he have nothing better to do? He finally persevered to the trace of rebellion in the depths of Enya's soul. When he flew out of the green seedling garden, an old man dressed as an old farmer was weeding. He looked at Lu Shi, wrinkled his old face and smiled. Thank you, young man. Chapter 924. What's there to thank me for? I'm just telling the truth. He had always felt that something was wrong with Enya. So this was the result. Fortunately, it was a perfect ending and he had no regrets. He had nothing to be disappointed about. The only regret was that this woman's so-called emotional severing was too illusory and not realistic at all. You should at least be an old friend before severing your emotional state, right? You won't lose any resources and the effect will be better, right? Since everything was over, he had no more worries. He didn't stay and went straight back to Xiaoyao. He hid in the cave and tried to break through the barrier. Although he didn't gain anything, his state of mind had finally calmed down. On this day, a clear ray of light shone down and a murmur entered their ears. Knowing that the time had come, they flew up into the air and saw 5 perfected sovereigns and 12 nascent soul cultivators waiting in the air. They didn't dare to say anything else and hurriedly flew over to the back of the group. It wasn't that he was dragging his feet. He came out as soon as he felt something, but how could his speed be compared to these great cultivators? These people had the space escape technique. Even if they were able to dodge, his little electric donkey still had to step on the accelerator a few times. Since everyone was here, he didn't waste any time. With Bai Mei as the leader, 18 people broke through the sky and left a trail of light. Of course, 17 of them were moving on their own, and one of them was wrapped in it and couldn't move freely. These people were too strong and couldn't walk through the crack. Moreover, on such a short journey, the shortcut provided by the crack wasn't as fast as their own speed. In a moment, the group had arrived at the 10,000 Buddha continent. 2 Buddhas were already waiting in the sky to receive them. When they stopped, they were already in a magnificent forest of pagodas. This was the most famous sacred place in the 10,000 Buddha continent, the 10,000 Buddha Pagoda Forest. This wasn't the usual place for the Yulan Buddhist assembly. The previous assemblies were usually held in the front temple of the 10,000 Buddha temple. The 10,000 Buddha Pagoda Forest was a more private place in the temple. Outsiders weren't allowed to enter. This time, there was a precedent. In the Wanfo temple, after every eminent monk passed away, a tall pagoda would be built in the temple as a memorial. The pagoda recorded their life stories and achievements in Buddhism. Inside the pagoda, there were objects that had nothing to do with cultivation. This did not include Shelley. There was another place for Shelley, and not every eminent monk would leave this thing behind. The 10,000 Buddha Pagoda Forest was more like a spiritual place to commemorate the high monks of the past. After hundreds of thousands of years, there were as many high monks as there were pagodas. Roughly speaking, there were over 10,000 pagodas. It was a magnificent sight. There was a special area for Taoist guests. There were hundreds of tall towers in the area, and each tower was supported by a canopy. It could be understood as a praying mat with a diameter of 1,000 feet. Taoists from different sects would wait quietly on their assigned praying mats. Of course, White Brows was long gone. People like them had their own places to meet, and they spoke in a language that others could not understand. Large-scale gatherings of cultivators generally wouldn't provide exotic delicacies, fruits, and beverages. This was especially true for Buddhist sections. As long as Buddha was present in one's heart, one wouldn't have any wild thoughts. This saved a lot of trouble. There was no need for clam immortals to serve tea and water. There was also no need for strong men to run around and pick up wine and plates. High-end cultivation gatherings would not pay attention to this. They would take the purest form of cultivation and focus on cultivation. This was a true Buddhist gathering and Dharma gathering. It was not the kind of gathering of the 3,000 unorthodox sects in the domain. This was especially true for some sword-range gatherings. Xiao Yu was also given a canopy. In terms of position, it was close to the main canopy. This was the treatment of the 9 great upper sects. White Brows was nowhere to be found. The other 4 perfected lords and Yuanying sat quietly. Only Lu Xiaoyi could not sit still. There was a fire under his butt. If he wanted to walk around, he would need to ask for leave, right? In theory, he should look for the leader of the perfected lords. However, White Brows was not around, and he did not know anyone else. Moreover, with the Yuanying in charge, it was not appropriate to look for the perfected lords directly. This was also part of the politics of cultivation sections. In fact, he did not know any of the Yuanying perfected ones. He could only look for the one closest to him. Uncle Master, in Buddhism, everything is unknown. I am willing to go and find out what is going on, just in case. The perfected one did not even open his eyes. Good. You are responsible. Go and listen to what those young spirit cultivators are plotting. Come back and report to me. Lu Xiaoyi was very embarrassed. Uncle Master, your requirements are a little high. The perfected one was very impatient. You can't sit still and want to look around. That's not a problem. But don't make up some inexplicable reasons. This is Buddhism, not the enemy's formation. I'm afraid that you will cause a lot of trouble before you find out what your plot is. Lu Xi nodded and bowed. No. I'm just going to see a few friends and exchange information. Lu Xiaoyi floated out of the canopy of the carefree wanderer and flew straight to the canopy next to it. The upper sects of Taoism were all gathered together, and were very close to each other. However, he could not use his divine senses. Everyone here was an almighty cultivator, so using their divine senses to communicate was meaningless. Outside the canopy of Qingwei Immortal Sect, Lu Xiaoyi gently waved his hand. Slug sat still, but he was extremely embarrassed. When Taoists participated in similar Dharma assemblies or Buddhist gatherings outside, rules were the most important. Especially for Qingwei, who considered herself the leader of Taoism, the disciples of the sect were all well-behaved. They could not act recklessly and run around everywhere. However, this thing was not obedient. Right now, he looked like a wild child outside the school who was asking people in class to play truant. He was in a dilemma whether to go or not, but if he did not go, he kept winking here and there. He was sitting on pins and needles. A perfected Lord Qingwei could not stand it any more and snorted coldly. Go! Are you just standing here pretending to be obedient? Slug felt very wronged. He was himself, and other people were other people. How could they be lumped together? The two of them gathered together. Since they had started to be distracted, of course, they could not let the other two go. Thus, the two of them ran to the canopy of the primeval cave and winked together. It did not take them long to squeeze out the cleft lip. When they came down, Morning Robe was smart enough to run out on his own before they could find him. The four of them gathered together, but they did not fly everywhere. They still followed the rules. They just found a canopy with no one nearby and landed. Then, Lu Xiaoyi opened his mouth. Brothers, for the sake of a possible trial, I think we should compare our testimonies. Was he going to establish an alliance? But the others obviously did not buy it. The cleft lip removed himself first. I participated in the incident at the Taipu realm. I was forced. Qin Xian did not let him go. But this does not change the fact that you were the one who gave the order to attack the monks. I am the most wronged one. I was coerced. Slug was disdainful. Coerced my ass. You did it on purpose all along, didn't you? Big Eyes and Little Eyes couldn't dodge the flying sword. You were not involved? You are pretending to be innocent. Are we all blind? The cleft lip exposed him. Slug, you have the nerve to speak loudly? The two of us are only related to the Taipu realm, but you are more than that. You were involved in the Shanlin Valley massacre, right? Although you didn't do anything, I sentence you to be an accomplice in transportation. You were not wronged at all by betting for profit. Slug was furious. What profit did I make? In the whole Shanlin Valley, I lost the most money. The three of them were not clear, but there was one thing they agreed on. There was no need to argue about the mastermind. It was set in stone. Chapter 925. Lu Xiaoyi felt a little strange. His so-called offensive and defensive alliance was mostly a joke. How could the four of them be the scapegoats for anything? It was impossible. Even if the main temple of Thousand Buddha Temple was burned down, with so many Taoist perfected monarchs and perfected masters here, they would definitely be able to protect them. This was a matter of Taoism's reputation. Since the most they would get was a few words of reprimand, why were these guys still here wishing they could wash themselves whiter than carrots? They were all Jean Dan's cultivators, their mental states were mature, their statuses were not low, and they were all responsible. What were they afraid of? Or perhaps they felt something? Like him? Because they did not know where the uneasiness came from, they could only start with the most recent possibility? I'm a little uneasy. But I don't know where it came from. Qin Xian was very straightforward, but Lu Xiaoyi knew that this sentence was directed at him, because the two of them shared a secret. He was worried that this uneasiness might have something to do with where they came from. Was it related to the fifth ring? This was what they were most worried about right now. However, Hairlip replied, I feel the same way. But I don't think it's because of what we did in the past. It doesn't make sense. The battle between Taoism and Buddhism in Zhou has never stopped. What's the big deal about killing a few monks? And most of them are from outside the domain. Slug frowned. I also have a premonition. I really shouldn't have sent 1 ear over. He's a troublemaker. Whoever gets involved will be unlucky. Lu Xiaoyi and Qin Xian looked at each other and heaved a sigh of relief. If only the two of them had a premonition, then the possibility of it being related to the fifth ring was very high. But if all four of them had a premonition, then it couldn't possibly be related to the fifth ring. Lu Xiaoyi spoke. I feel that you guys are scaring yourselves. In any case, we have some friendship, but when something happens, fine, it's all made of paper. Think about it, why did the Taoist sect send so many perfected monarchs here? Is it really because of our trivial matter? Why did they come to Thousand Buddha continent? Is there any other possibility other than the Yulan Buddhist assembly? Look at how many people from Bitterzen Temple came. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they had turned out in full force, right? Just to deal with the four of us, Jin Dan? I'm guessing that it might be related to the Zhou Xian upper realm. There was such a huge change. Our problem is just a small problem that can be solved conveniently. Getting to the point, Hairlip guessed. I reckon that the changes are related to Buddhism. The Yulan Buddhist assembly is just a coincidence. Slug also said. Many great cultivators also seem to have some sort of premonition. This is not a small matter. I agree with 1 ear. If everyone has an ominous feeling, then it can only be related to Zhou Xian. Qin Xian, on the other hand, was enjoying the show. In fact, she also had the intention to take the initiative to divert the topic so that she could test the views of the people of Zhou Xian towards the outer region. It's a pity that we can't get in touch with cultivators from other realms. If people from other realms also have a premonition, could it be a big deal for the cultivation world of the entire universe? Hairlip shook his head. Impossible. As far as the intuition of a cultivator is concerned, the cultivators from other realms are different from us in Zhou Xian. This is because the fate clouds in their minds have yet to appear, so their premonition ability is somewhat lacking. The few of them guessed back and forth, but they could not figure out the reason. This was very strange for a cultivator. They could not get in touch with cultivators of a higher level, nor could they join the real core. In their opinion, the judgment of those great cultivators of yang spirit was closer to the truth, right? The Yulan Buddhist assembly this time could be said to be the grandest one in tens of thousands of years. Almost all the members of the two Buddhist sects were present, not only those who were in the region, but also those who hurried back. Although the 1,000 Buddhas still made many preparations for the assembly in an orderly manner, and did their best, there was an uneasy atmosphere in the air. Cultivators with keen senses could feel it. After the small gathering, everyone returned to the canopy of their respective sections. To them, the only thing that gave them peace of mind was that even if the sky fell, there would be tall people to hold it up. There were quite a number of tall people here. The tallest ones were the Buddhas, and the second tallest ones were the Yuanying Bodhisattvas. As for them, Jin Dan Arhats, it was not their turn to shoulder the responsibility. They just had to listen to the tune. Because it was on the dot, it arrived at noon and opened at dusk. This was the custom of the Buddhist sections. Whenever there was a great Buddha event, the time would start at dusk. In terms of the ritual, the Buddhist assembly was more complicated and detailed than the Taoist assembly. Not only were there thousands of bhikkhus chanting sutras, there were also hundreds of arhats chanting Sanskrit chants. The atmosphere was extremely good, and the entire 10,000 Buddhas pagoda was a real Buddhist world. Not only that, but all the mortal believers of the entire 10,000 Buddhas continent were also organized on this day to participate in the Yulan Buddhist assembly held in various places. Hundreds of millions of people were chanting at the same time. Under the convergence of their faith, the Taoists felt suffocated, as if the spiritual vigor around them had been stripped away. Of course, only the four little Jin Dan felt this way. The enlightened masters and true sovereigns did not care. In Lu Xiaoyi's eyes, all the solemnity was just a facade. The Buddhist chanting was ethereal, and in his ears, it was just noise. The bliss in the hearts of the monks was his extreme annoyance. There was no other way, this was the personality of a swordsman. Perhaps when he reached Yuanying, he would be able to comprehend by analogy. But right now, he could only be a cow chewing on peonies. Under such solemnity, of course, he could not be presumptuous. This was respect for the orthodoxy. Since he was here, he could not act according to his temperament. He had to follow the lead of the host. He was very distressed. He did not know how long this atmosphere would torture him. He definitely could not listen to the Buddhist scriptures. He could close his eyes and not look at the ceremony in front of him, but he could not stop the sound from drilling into his ears. That was the power of the faith of hundreds of millions of people. How could he, a mere Jin Dan, be able to completely block it out? There was no other way. He could only put his mind on the most troublesome problem, the problem of whether Jin Dan could accept it or not. Under such a complicated environment, trying to break through Jin Dan's barrier was the only thing he could do. He silently operated the stars, and spiritual vigor entered his dantian in a single line. It was like a full pool of water, unable to hold a single extra drop. But in reality, Jin Dan's pool was not full. This phenomenon was a disaster for Jin Dan. No one could accurately say how long it would take to break this strange cycle. Could it be done? Even if it was done, the time wasted would be enough to cause the cultivator to forever be stuck in the Yuanying realm. As for how he ended up in this situation, after a long period of contemplation, he had a slight understanding. It was because of that memory regression. When memories were forcefully changed, there would definitely be consequences. He did not notice it at that time. It was because he was not knowledgeable enough, and his vision was limited. There must have been something in the unseen world that affected his Jin Dan's perception during that 1 year of memory regression. Thus, it created the current illusion. He thought that this was a good experience, he could reminisce about the past, and he could hold hands with the beauty. But there was nothing that did not come with a price. Perhaps it was that Yuanying's last resort that caused him to fall into a situation that he could not extricate himself from. He spun around in place, but time flew by quickly. Chapter 9:26. Lu Xiaoyi had no choice but to use all the mana in his body to resist it. Xiaoyao Zhenren wanted to help him but was rejected. This was not Buddhism's intention but the process of such a grand ceremony. This was also the reason why the Taoists did not bring Jin Dan disciples to the Yulon Buddhist conference. If one's state of mind was not strong enough, it would be easy to get lost in the Buddha's voice. Lu Xiaoyi wanted to resist it himself. In his heart, he also wanted to take advantage of this rare opportunity to see if he could break the virtual image of Jin Dan. Who knows? He had to give it a try. If it was another time, there would not be so many eminent monks to create such a powerful and harmless Buddhist pressure for him. Although the 4 gold core cultivators lived in different canopies, they made the same choice. They didn't accept the protection of their elders, but chose to resist on their own. This was also the reason why they were able to reach this step. Qin Xian was using this opportunity to sharpen his yin-yang state. Rabbit Lip was using this pressure to force a trace of spiritual vigor into his Jin Dan. Slug was practicing a secret technique to resist the Buddha's pressure. He could foresee the countless grievances between himself and Buddhism in the future because he had recently made a very unreliable friend. Since he could not block his friend, he could only strengthen his resistance to attacks. What Lu Xiaoyi was doing was essentially the same as what Rabbit Lip was doing. The difference was that Rabbit Lip could still inject spiritual vigor into his dantian, but Lu Xiaoyi could only inject spiritual vigor. He still did not give up because he had to resist the Buddha's pressure. His entire body's momentum was driven by the Xingqiang technique, and his mana was concentrated in his body, which consumed a lot of his energy. He did not have to worry too much about the problem of consumption because he had dozens of Taoist Jinren and hundreds of Taoist Jinren around him. While his Dantian was madly outputting spiritual vigor to resist the Buddha's pressure, he was desperately replenishing it with spiritual vigor. In this dynamic balance, he was trying to break the void barrier. This was a bit like using brute force to break through the barrier. To be honest, it was written in the ancient records of cultivation that it was the stupidest method. The success rate was almost zero. But he really did not have any better method now. He could not find the opportunity at all. Could it be that he could find another opportunity to rewind his memory? Don't let the void barrier be broken and the pool become smaller. The law is equal, there is no superior or inferior. With no self, no person, no sentient beings, and no longevity, if one cultivates all the good dharma, one will attain the Avatara Samkhya. Regarding all dharma, one should know, see, and understand without giving birth to dharma. All dharma is like a dream, an illusion, a bubble, or a shadow, like dew or lightning. One should observe it as it is. The speaker has nothing to say, he is a speaker. On the stage, there was an eminent monk giving a speech. The great Buddha, whose realm was equivalent to Yang Spirit, was giving a speech that Lu Xiaoyi had never heard before. Even if he didn't understand it, he could understand something from the expression, tone, rhythm, atmosphere, and so on. This was what most Taoist cultivators were doing. But Lu Xiaoyi was a ghoul. Now he was gritting his teeth and fighting with the Jin Dan virtual barrier in his body. Therefore, when others heard it, they were intoxicated, and their faces were full of enjoyment, but Lu Xiaoyi looked ferocious and gritted his teeth. A meeting of great Buddhas would not change because of his gritting teeth, and the Buddha statues in the temple were not all benevolent. There were also some with angry eyes, some with drooping eyes, and some with closed eyes. Of course, it didn't matter if he was gritting his teeth. When it came to the subtle and profound, there were flowers falling, golden lotuses growing on the ground, and auspicious light falling from the sky. This was true ability, not relying on the power of Buddha, but only on inspiration. Lu Xiaoyi couldn't help but resist. The spiritual power in his Dantian had reached the limit that he could do, as if it would explode if there were any more changes, but the void barrier was still unshaken. Everything he was doing now was useless, and he had used his strength in the wrong place. He sighed in his heart, knowing that he shouldn't persist any longer. He had gone the wrong way and hit a wall. He couldn't keep hitting it like this. At this moment, the world seemed to be quiet. No, not the world, as if the universe had stopped at this moment. Time stopped flowing, space stopped changing. The flowers became dim. The golden lotuses lost their color, the auspicious light became dim. When the universe became quiet, it was as if a cat had knocked over a porcelain bowl in an empty room, and it fell to the ground, breaking into several pieces. Something in Lu Xiaoyi's body also broke. This made him ecstatic. The void barrier of his Dantian that had puzzled him for many years was silently broken. Immediately, the spiritual opportunity rushed in, and the thirst in his Dantian that he hadn't felt for many years returned to him. He didn't even know that this was his own efforts that had worked? Or was it the change in the external environment that had helped him a lot? Or was there something else in the dark? At the same time, he suddenly felt that the trace of uneasiness in his intuition had disappeared. He had returned to normal, as if that trace of uneasiness had never appeared. The void barrier of his Dantian was also related to his intuition. The problem was, why did other people also feel uneasiness in his Dantian? No matter what, it was a good thing. A great thing. He even had the impulse to recite a poem. But what happened next made him hold back his urge to recite a poem. Om! A deep Buddhist chant sounded, filled with desolation. The one who made such a deafening sound was the great Buddha who had been sitting on the Zen platform, chanting lotus flowers from his mouth. There was no longer any preaching of sutras, just this Om word that kept circling, Immediately after, countless Buddhas opened their mouths, also chanting the same Om word. Then came the Bodhisattvas, Arhats, and thousands of bhikkhus. When all the monks of the Yulon Buddhist assembly chanted the same word, the power of this word was unstoppable. It shook Lu Xiaoyi's eardrums until they were numb, and his good mood from breaking through the void barrier was completely gone. He also didn't have the mood to write poems, and only wanted to open his mouth and curse. Luckily, he still knew where this place was. Something must have happened. All the monks, whether they were bhikkhus or Buddhas, were similarly miserable. From the desolation in their voices, he could tell that their emotions were not feigned. He could empathize with them. What happened? Did Buddha kick the bucket? Between heaven and earth, everything returned to normal, but it felt like something was missing. Not only were the monks mourning, even the Taoists watching the ceremony were frowning. This shouldn't be. As old rivals for hundreds of thousands of years, shouldn't the Taoists be the ones laughing when the monks are unlucky? He really couldn't suppress the curiosity in his heart, and found a Taoist who looked gentle and normal, and asked with his divine sense, "Martial uncle, what's going on? What are they doing? That's why they are so distraught." The Taoist sighed. "Just now, the Xiantian Tao merit shattered." Chapter 927. Lu Xiaoyi was dumbfounded. He wanted to ask again, but the perfected one looked like he could not open his mouth. Lu Xiaoyi could not help but scratch his head anxiously. It was not that he was not shrewd, but this was not a small matter. It was the innate great Tao, the cornerstone of the heavenly Tao. It determined the future of the universe's myriad worlds. It determined the direction of countless cultivators' Tao. He could not even imagine that there was something bigger than this in the universe. He thought about Zhou Xian, the 5 rings, and the azure sky. It was just a world, it did not affect the foundation of the universe's cultivation world. And the innate great Tao merit fragment did not only affect the human cultivation world. It also affected the half-immortals. It even affected the real immortals. Zhou Xian's upper realm was so sad, and the 5 rings' azure sky was the same. Presumably the immortal world was not much better, right? What the immortals had to face was even more direct. The great Buddha finally stopped his snorting. He continued to speak, but his voice was low and sorrowful. "Lost my Tao forever." Lu Xiaoyi could not help but feel fear in his heart. After personally experiencing the collapse of the great Tao, what else was there to care about? Even his small matter was not worth mentioning in front of the collapse of the great Tao. He did not ask for leave, but went to the empty canopy again. This time, he did not need to contact them. The 4 Jin Dan jumped over, and no one cared about their rudeness. The 4 of them gathered and looked at each other. They had all made their guesses before this, but no matter how they guessed, Zhou Xian was not the one who made the biggest guess. But they did not expect that when the mystery was revealed, it would be such an unbelievable result. In front of this result, no one cared about their trivial matters anymore. Because this meant change. A subversive change. Many things that you thought were important were no longer important. What you thought was insignificant was becoming a reality. This is great. Will we be the last generation of cultivators? Slug was disappointed. Rabbit Lip was still calm. 10,000 years ago, morality collapsed. The history of the sect recorded that this was the result of personal choice. 800 years ago, fate collapsed. The elders said that this was just a coincidence. Now merit collapsed. Who dares to say that this is a coincidence? Rabbit Lip said each word with a ferocious expression. This is not a coincidence. This is a trend. I dare say that as the collapse of the Grand Tao progresses, this time will become faster and faster. In another few hundred years, as long as we can endure until we reach the Yuanying stage, we will definitely see the next innate Tao crumbling. One after another. How long could the 36 innate Taos last? Thousands of years? In any case, it won't last 10,000 years. Qin Xian was also somewhat absent-minded. This is a new era. 125,000 years in an era. How many are we now? 36. It was the number of Heavenly Dipper. Who would have thought that it would really come? Will the universe enter the age of chaos? Among the 36 innate Taoists, the first one to crumble was Tao of Morals. This was an innate Tao that was more inclined towards Taoism. Taoists were more used to talking about morality every day, but Buddhists rarely did so. They had merit and virtue to replace it. Destiny, on the other hand, was a relatively neutral innate Tao. Both Taoism and Buddhism were talking about it and placing great importance on it. As for merit, it was more inclined towards Buddhism. Very few people mentioned it in Taoism. In other words, 3 innate Taos had crumbled in the past 10,000 years. Both Taoism and Buddhism had reached a tie. This also meant that there was no such thing as Taoism and Buddhism disappearing, or Buddhism and Tao disappearing. The problem now was that everyone was finished. What did the crumbling of the innate Tao mean? It might not matter if one crumbled, as it would not affect the overall situation, but if it formed a trend and became a domino, this was the change of era that Qin Xian mentioned. In the mortal world, there would be a change of dynasties. The emperor and the ministers in power would change, and all the old order and structure would be shattered and restarted. It was the same in the cultivation world. It could be as small as a sect, a continent, a realm, or a universe. It could be as big as the entire universe being overturned and restarted. It did not matter if it was Qi refinement stage ants or gods and Buddhas. When the universe crumbled, there would be no distinction between high and low, and everyone would be treated equally. With regards to this, Lu Xiaoyi could not be compared to the other 3 who came from Orthodox Taoism because he was born in Taoism. They had been influenced by what they saw and heard in their hundreds of years of cultivation. They had rich ancient books and had elders who were passionate about Taoism. They could always hear things that he did not know. As for the change of era, Lu Xiaoyi had only occasionally glanced through the storehouse after he came to the upper realm of Zhou Xian. According to the ancient books, the author himself was not clear about it. The change of era was divided into small eras, ******. There was no need to talk about ******. The entire universe crumbled and returned to chaos. All life would disappear, and so would cultivation. Then, a new world would be created. If this was really the change of *****, then one should eat and drink as one should, and marry as one should. Anyway, there was not much time left. Let's just enjoy this life. There was not even reincarnation. There was still fun in the small eras. The cultivation world was still around. It was just that the 36 innate Taos would have to be fought over again. This meant that there would be a long period of chaos in the cultivation world. As for how the Celestials would change in this change, would they fall? How would the 4 graces evolve? Would they be annihilated? How would the cultivator's state change? Would they be able to maintain it? Then they would be completely confused. They could only hope that there would be a way when the time came. After all, no one had experienced it before. The last time this happened was 36 years ago, which was over 4 million years ago. Who could live for so long? Perhaps they could only find it in the immortal court. There would not be many of them. All these speculations were based on the trend. What if this domino broke in one of the links? What would happen then? There were countless possibilities. There were countless inferences, but there was one point. The heavenly Tao was definitely not complete. The cultivation world would only become more and more chaotic. But cultivators would never think about problems like this. 1 or 2 times was a coincidence, but if it happened 3 times, it would definitely be inevitable. If there were still people who thought that everything would continue as before, they would be deceiving themselves and others. But there would always be people who wanted to comfort themselves. Slug's face was full of hope. Maybe there will be people who will merge with the innate Taos? Will it return to the past? Qin Xian shook his head. Morality has collapsed for more than 10,000 years. Who has heard of someone merging with morality? This is collapse, not emptiness. If it was different, it would never be the same again. It will only be possible after another era. Slug wanted to find other reasons, but there was nothing he could do. Thus, he looked at Lu Xiaoyi. Aren't you usually very talkative? Why are you pretending to be mute when it comes to such a crucial matter? Lu Xiaoyi was very humble. The sword vein doesn't know much about this. It can't be compared to the 3 orthodox Taoists. It has a long history. I'm just listening. How would I dare to express my opinion? Slug shouted. Bull**T. You don't know much about the sword vein, but you dare to do it. Did you know that the first person to collapse the innate Taoist was you swordsman? At that time, I thought it was just a personal choice, an unconscious coincidence. But now, I feel that the swordsman did it on purpose. It was you swordsman who pushed down the first domino. And you're still pretending to be innocent? What kind of person are you? You're already dead, and you're still leaving behind such a huge hole for the future generations. Harelip said faintly. He might not really be dead, right? Anyway, if it were me, I would definitely hide somewhere and secretly watch. Slug felt a chill. Watch what? Qing Xian gritted his teeth. Watch the universe change. Chapter 928. P.S. Happy New Year. Wish you all the best. Also, I'm looking for guaranteed monthly votes and subscriptions. Whether he would eat meat or grass in 2021, it would all depend on his friend's help. Please. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. I didn't push them. What's the use of shouting at me? But if it were me, I would push them too. Seeing the 3 of them looking at him fiercely, Lu Xiaoyi knew that he couldn't anger them, so he smiled mysteriously. You should thank the sword vein. Thank the swordsman. You have to treat me to a meal because the sword vein gave you a chance. Seeing that the 3 of them were puzzled, Lu Xiaoyi lowered his voice. If the worst-case scenario really happens, like what Harelip said, the Khanate Great Taoists will collapse one by one and change the era. According to this trend, the time will be shorter and shorter. How long will it take for the 36 Khanate Great Taoists to collapse? Qing Xian thought for a moment. More than 5,000 years, within 10 to 20,000 years. Everyone nodded and agreed with this judgment. After all, the Khanate Great Taoists were extraordinary. It was impossible for them to collapse today and tomorrow. There had to be a gradual process. Lu Xiaoyi said softly. So, those perfected lords and half-immortals now won't live that long. And during this period, they won't be able to merge those collapsed Khanate Great Taoists. We are different. In a few hundred years, we will become nascent souls. In 1,000 years, we will become sovereigns. The normal time to reach young spirit is 5,000 years. Considering the half-immortal stage, if everything goes smoothly, we will be at the peak of Tao unification in 10,000 years. As long as we are in the right place, even pigs can fly. In front of us, there are 36 Khanate Great Taoists waiting for us. What a good opportunity. Merge one, throw one away, hide one, as long as we can keep going. Tell me, didn't my sword ancestor create the best opportunity for you? Shouldn't you be grateful? Shouldn't you treat me to a meal? Shouldn't you respect me as your boss? Without that push, you guys wouldn't have been able to fart together. Lu Xiaoyi painted an extremely big picture. Everyone knew that it might be a dream, but everyone was still unconsciously attracted by this dream. As a cultivator, who wouldn't want to? Even someone as experienced as a Harelip, as straightforward as a slug, and as quiet as Qing Xian could not help but be attracted by this dream. Even though they knew that it might be illusory, they still could not help but think and yearn for it. Cultivators. That sword ancestor is really too evil. I'm almost certain that he did it on purpose. Qing Xian almost spilled the beans. Even though he was calm and experienced, he still couldn't control his mind in the face of such a drastic change. Harelip nodded. That's right. People like him who controlled the changing process of the epoch would definitely be treated differently from the great Tao that collapsed later on. Who knows, they might have a backup plan after the change of era. That's too bad. Lu Shi coughed lightly. I've never seen people like you. Not only did he take advantage of her, he even dared to speak ill of her. You call that bad? That's called the tide of the times, okay? Cut the crap. These are all too far away from us. What's more important now is the impact of the collapse of the great Tao on the cultivation world. More specifically, what would happen in the Zhou Xian upper realm? Would there be a cultivation war? Would there be strong enemies from the outside? The rules of the heavenly Tao are supported by the 36 Khanate great Taos. A house has 36 pillars. It doesn't matter if a few of them fall, but if too many of them fall, there would definitely be an impact. From the room leaking air and rain to partial collapse, and finally to the ruins, how big of an impact would this have on us? Regarding this, Hairlip had a different opinion. I understand the behavior of the cultivation world in the Zhou Xian upper realm very well. Forgive me for being blunt, but at least for a few hundred years, before the news spreads completely, the overall situation in the cultivation world will not worsen. On the contrary, it will be better. This is because Taoists and Buddhists will no longer spend their energy on fighting each other. They will focus their energy on how to control the 3,000 unorthodox doors. The major powers will definitely not panic. All of this is just our speculation. There are countless possibilities. If Zhou Xian collapses due to internal strife before the epic change comes, that would be the real joke. Therefore, there will definitely be strong control. You have to be careful. You can't act like you did in the upper forest in your shaking shadow. It was rare for this guy to be so considerate of him. Could it be that he had been fed a pie in the sky? Lu Xiaoyi smiled and said, after strong control, it might mean a collapse. Hairlip snorted. Maybe, who knows? But the most important thing now is to stabilize. Then, we need to see the reactions of various parties. Hasty responses to news from the immortal court and the half-immortals are the worst. We need to wait for news from above. Above them, there was only the immortal court. For a large realm like Zhou Xian, there was no lack of backers above them. Slug pondered and said, Hairlip is right. For the time being, Zhou Xian's danger will come from other realms. In the surroundings of Zhou Xian, there are too many realms that harbor rebellious intentions. Usually, we don't dare to touch them. But now, if we don't, we may never have the chance. How big of an impact will the collapse of the Great Path of Merit have on Buddhism? Lu Xiaoyi asked a very realistic question. Very big. Very big. Hairlip was very sure. Among the 36 innate great Taos, most of them are suitable for Taoism. The East is not bright, the West is bright. Just like the collapse of moral destiny, the impact on Taoism's inheritance is very limited. It's only a certain branch that will be affected, it won't shake the foundation. But to Buddhists, merit is the foundation. Slug didn't quite agree. Buddhism isn't that simple. Senior brother, you can't underestimate them. Merit is just a trick they use to fool mortals. In fact, they rarely use it in battle. Fortune, saint virtue, nether virtue, nirvana, creation, nirvana, strength, cause and effect, reincarnation. Do you dare to say that Buddhism is weaker than Taoism? The loss of merit is just the elimination of a great weapon for Buddhism to spread in the mortal world. The impact on the foundation will take a long time to ferment before it shows up. Qing Xian said faintly. This also means that if Buddhism has any plans, they don't have much time. When the foundation is gone, they won't have any successors. What can they use to make a comeback? Hairlip and Slug nodded. Her words were clear. However, when it reached Lu Xiaoyi's ears, it was a different matter. He knew that Qing Xian was talking about the infiltration of the fate of Zhou Xian's upper realm into the five-ring sky. After years of observation, they had already preliminarily determined that this shouldn't be the overall strategy of Zhou Xian's upper realm, Taoism and Buddhism. At least for Taoism, they weren't deeply involved. The real driving force behind the scenes should be Buddhism. Of course, this was just a speculation. There were too many specific things that needed to be investigated, and they needed to reach a higher level. Initially, it was still in the plan, but now they realized that they were running out of time. With the collapse of merit, how much time was left for Buddhism to prepare? How much time was left for them? Chapter 929. P.S. Life is tough, piracy is rampant. The author's life is also tough. His hair is all gone, and he can't even afford a wig. He can't even go out to meet people. Please subscribe to the original Chidien. To you, it's just some money for breakfast, but to old Zhua, it's timely help. No matter how persistent the great Buddha was, it would be difficult to continue the Buddhist conference if the people's hearts were scattered. You couldn't unite a group of disordered cultivators, just like how you could face a group of hesitant scholars when the imperial examination system was terminated. The news was strictly prohibited from leaking out. But in fact, Yuanying and Jinjuan could sense it with their own senses, not to mention thousands of monks. The object of the prohibition was only targeted at the 3,000 unorthodox groups, but considering that there were also Jinjuan and Jinjuan in the unorthodox groups, only God knew how effective such a prohibition would be. The relationships in the world of cultivation were as dense as a web, with their own channels. Unless there were some deeply hidden secrets, things like the collapse of Tao could not be hidden from people. The ceremony was still going on, but it was completely a formality. The Jinjuan and Buddhas were very busy. They were busy with meetings, collecting information from the higher-ups, and making judgments. Their premonitions before the incident were much more accurate than Jean Dan's. They knew that the change was likely related to Buddhism, so they came in large numbers. But in the end, they waited for such a result. Yuanying and Bodhisattvas were also very busy. They had all kinds of guesses, asking about the higher-ups, and suppressing the lower-ups, to prevent some false and provocative news from spreading. Especially the Bodhisattvas who enlightened the large group of Luohan and Bhikkhu, one of the principles was that they could not be chaotic. Relatively speaking, there were only a few Taoist golden core cultivators, and they were all the best among the golden core cultivators. Their self-control was very strong, so the elders only told them not to believe in rumors. As for the rest, they were left to their own devices and were too lazy to care. The most important thing for the future of this world was to take care of oneself. The people's hearts were scattered. The four hairy people were still gathered on the empty canopy, chatting and farting. No one cared about their problems anymore. Now, everyone was facing a new, common, and bigger problem. Rabbit Lip was proud. I said it right? But only one day passed, and the higher-ups passed down two conclusions. Firstly, the collapse of merit was just a coincidence. A half-immortal expert was in the process of fusing the Tao. Secondly, the Immortal Court has decreed that even if the worst-case scenario happens, it will only be a change of a minor epoch at best. The world of cultivators will not be greatly affected. Let's settle down. They all understood that these two were pure nonsense. None of them could be trusted. Their only purpose was to control the agitated emotions of the cultivators below. Especially the first one. After the collapse of morality, there had been half-immortal experts trying to fuse with the Tao. What was the result? Even after tens of thousands of years, nothing came out of it. Such was fate. Even after 800 years, no one had ever succeeded. Why was it so fast when it came to merit? As for the second one, it was still ambiguous. It could be the reincarnation of a small era, or it could also be the cycle of reincarnation. It could only be said that the probability of a small era was much higher. Even the universe could not withstand the torment of multiple cycles of reincarnation. Everything had a habit, or else it would become a habitual flow, and every few million years, humans would have to start all over again. Maybe in the future, it won't be humans who rule the cultivation world anymore? It could also be a bug. The slug began to indulge in its imagination. Rabbit Lip was displeased. Can you stop talking nonsense like that? You are spreading rumors. If you are caught, your cultivation will be crippled. How can you say such nonsense at this time? Everyone is in a panic. If you dare to say it, there will be people who dare to believe it and spread it. The slug twitched his mouth. Aren't I just saying it among the few of us? Who would say such things outside? Besides, if this is considered spreading rumors, then what's the point of saying it with one ear? He is basically encouraging people to rebel. Directly beheading him. Qin Xian said seriously. In the next few days, there will definitely be other news. Without a doubt, it will be news to control the situation. This is the correct way of cultivation. We just need to support it. Before this incident, the battle in the cultivation world is only a battle of orthodoxies. The battle of Taoism and Buddhism, the battle of orthodox Taoism, and the battle of domains. But once the Tao collapses, we will have to face a more realistic battle of the era. Rabbit Lip nodded. He was a little similar to Qin Xian. They were both scheming. Morn clothes is right. The battle of the era. Looking at the time window, starting from our generation, we will be able to join in the fight for the Xiantian Tao. The great cultivators above don't have enough lifespan and won't be able to last until that day. Only we are in the most advantageous position. Yes, including the next few generations of foundation establishment. In the cultivation world, no matter how strong an individual is, they will not be able to deal with such a chaotic situation. Therefore, I suggest that we strengthen our cooperation. In the end, it is still too far away for us to fight for the Tao. What we need to do now is to support each other and live on. Their backgrounds were the same. They all had standard Tao meridians. Originally, they were also related, but they were not close. But in the current situation, it was important to have their own friends outside the sect and their own strength. The sect was the foundation. But what about a few thousand years later? When they stepped onto the stage of true monarchs, their relationship could decide many things. As for the competition? What about the 36 Xiantian Das? Was it not enough for 4 people to share? Young people would always have young thoughts. It might seem arrogant now, but who knew what would happen in the future? Lu Xiai sighed. In the universe, at the level of Yuanying and above, the competition in the future will be very cruel. I'm afraid that we will never be able to return to the previous polite and peaceful situation. What we can see, they will definitely see even further. Who would be willing to withdraw from the battle of the Tao? The 4 sighed. The sudden change had disrupted everyone's cultivation arrangements. Everyone was faced with a new choice. Even the direction of their own Tao teachings. What about the direction of Tao teachings? The collapse of the Tao will definitely affect a cultivator's ability in the Tao realm. 10,000 years ago, morality was not there, and there was no one who cultivated morality in the cultivation world of the universe. 800 years ago, fate was not there, and divination disappeared overnight. Now merit is not there. Although the ones who are anxious are the monks, and it has nothing to do with us Taoists, who knows who will be the next to collapse? What if after painstakingly cultivating for hundreds of years, just as we are about to succeed, our Tao is gone? Wouldn't you feel wronged? Snot sighed. What he said was actually the most realistic problem in the cultivation process for cultivators. It was also a problem that they were about to face. Previously, when choosing the Tao realm, they only needed to follow their heart and let nature take its course. Now, they had to consider whether this thing would still be there after a few years. The key was, what order was there to speak of? Not to mention them, the small Jin Dan, even the immortals of the immortal court would find it difficult to guess which Xiantian Tao would collapse next. Which sect has the approximate order of the last era? Lu Xiaoyi asked a stupid question. Snot was disdainful. Please, can you grow some brains? The last era was more than 4 million years ago. Not to mention the 9 upper sects, even the existence of the Zhou Xian upper realm is a problem. Where can we find the ancient books? Chapter 930. Rabbit Lip pondered and said, Yesterday, I overheard some of the elders in the sect talking. It's more reliable than me blindly guessing. I reckon that after we go back, every upper sect will categorize the things related to the Tao realm in the sect and arrange the possible order to guide their disciples' cultivation. They will try their best to avoid stepping on landmines too quickly. According to the elders, although they can't be sure which will collapse next, there are too many choices. However, they can roughly guess which ones will collapse in the end. For example, time, space, 5 elements, yin and yang, creation, chaos, strength, and cause and effect. These innate Das should be the last ones to collapse. I think it makes sense. The few of them nodded in agreement. The innate Das mentioned by Rabbit Lip were the cornerstones of the human cultivation world. It was hard to imagine what a cultivation world with chaotic time and space would be like. All the escape techniques and spells of major cultivators would be affected because there were no standards. Similarly, the 5 elements and yin and yang were equally important because they were the cornerstones of nature. Without the 5 elements and yin and yang, how would plants grow? How would heaven and earth change? For Taoists, once the 5 elements were scattered, 90% of the spells would be affected and become unstable. If the new era begins, I'm afraid these will be the first to converge, Qin Xian added. The few of them were having a heated discussion. Only Lu Xiaoyi was smiling foolishly at the side. Snotty was very unhappy. Ear! Why are you smiling foolishly instead of talking? Gloating? That's the characteristic of your sword vein. The messier, the better. Lu Xiaoyi ignored him. This guy looked like Dafa, but he was actually very stingy. Ever since he lost thousands of spiritual stones in Upper Forest Valley, he had been giving him a hard time. Was there a need for this? I'm thinking about the story of groundless fears. Look at all of you. Those who know are the 4 Jean Dan chatting here. Those who don't know would think that it's the 4 Graces who are giving pointers to the universe. The 3 of them glared at each other. Lu Xiaoyi leisurely said, "What's the point of thinking so much? The direction of the Tao realm should be the direction of the Tao realm. Even if you want to cultivate moral destiny, there's no problem. Isn't it just the dispersal of the Tao? Don't forget that we are the ones who will converge the Tao in the future. You only want to avoid these great Taos now, but when you really reach that juncture, what are you going to do? It is precisely because they are scattered that we have the opportunity to work hard and reunite the Tao." Of course, he had to face the challenge head-on, and not retreat. If you want to spend the rest of your life in Yanning True Monarch, then of course you have to stay as far away as possible. If you are still ambitious, then there is no need to hide. I'll do whatever I want. The 3 of them stared blankly for a moment. Then they all stood up and bowed to Lu Xi. This was a true cultivator. It was also the Great Path. Slug gave him a thumbs up. Here, I've known you for so long, and you've finally said something reasonable. Among the 4 of them, Rabbit Lip and Slug often went back to listen to the elders' latest judgments. When only Lu Xiaoyi and Qin Xian were left, they looked at each other, shook their heads and smiled bitterly. It seems like what we're doing is meaningless? In the context of the collapse of the Great Tao, the Battle of Realms is nothing. Qin Xian was somewhat disheartened. They had endured here for more than 100 years, but they didn't expect to wait for such an outcome. My opinion is the exact opposite. It's because of the collapse of the Great Tao that the monsters have no scruples. That's why they are determined to take the risk. Chaos has arrived in the cultivation world. Those who have grievances will seek revenge, and those who have grievances will seek redress. Those who are ambitious will naturally give it a try. Those who are hesitant will not hesitate now. Because the rules are also collapsing. At a higher level, the restrictions that have restrained the great cultivators for millions of years are loosening. Just like in the mortal world, before the new regime is established, it is the most turbulent and dangerous era. We don't have much time left. Qin Xian quickly regained his calm. This was not the state he should be in. What surprised him was that whether it was the possible conspiracy of Buddhism or the collapse of the Great Tao, this swordsman maintained a shocking indifference. Could this be the tradition of the sword vein? After all, The disaster was most likely instigated by their sword ancestor. When I go back, I'll start trying to reach the upper realm. Jean Dan's position is too awkward. It's difficult for them to come into contact with the real truth. Moreover, I reckon that under the premise of the collapse of the Great Tao, they may not be so tight-lipped about other secrets. With your cultivation, don't cause too much trouble. I don't want to shoulder all the burdens alone in the future. Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. No rush, take it slow. Eat as much as you can. I don't have the resolve to save the world. You go up first and do more. I will cheer you from behind. Qin Xian glanced at him. He wanted to say something, but in the end he didn't. This swordsman was right. The upper realm could never be achieved because you needed it. He was a little anxious. This year's Yulon Buddhist Assembly was still meticulously carried out according to the predetermined schedule. Even if it was just for show, they had to show that everything was under control. It wasn't until half a month later that the Taoists began to leave. It seemed that they had reached an agreement with Buddhism on some issues. Lu Xiaoyi was only a little worried about Xia Bingji and Yin Ye's breakthrough. At the juncture of the collapse of the Great Tao, would it affect them? However, this was not something he could help with. He directly returned to Yaoying. He could imagine that the swordsman brothers in Yaoying had a vague understanding of the changes of the Great Tao, and their desire to know the truth. It was just like the students in his previous life who had filled in the college entrance examination. When the results came out, they were told that there were no more than 985,211. Only Lan Xiang was left? This chaotic scene was only alleviated after he returned. In the 10 days in Wanfo continent, he was fortunate enough to listen to the seniors in front of him. In addition, there were 4 Jean Dan to supplement each other. It could be said that he had a rough understanding of the possible effects of the collapse of the Great Tao. This understanding came from the 4 upper sects of Taoism, possibly including the 9 upper sects of the Zhou Xian upper realm. Before there was more information, this should be the most reliable and the most reliable understanding. This helped to calm the restless hearts of the swordsmen. In the end, Lu Xiaoyi concluded, "This is a bad thing, but also a good thing. It's a disaster, but also an opportunity. It depends on which aspect you think about it from. To us swordsmen, there is no need to consider the changes of the laws of heaven and earth that we can't grasp. We shouldn't be influenced by these changes. If you can't resolve your doubts after listening to my explanation and still feel anxious, then it only means that you don't have the heart of a swordsman. There must be an effect if there's a cause. I heard that we swordsmen were the ones who pushed down the Great Tao dominoes. In my opinion, this means that our sword vein has the initiative in this change of the Great Tao. We are the participants, not the passive. If we are lucky enough to reunite here after thousands of years, you will know how important today's choice is to you. In this chaotic world, it's time for us to rise. However, you must have the most basic ability to participate. From the looks of it, Yuanying is just the beginning. If you can't even do this, then find a place to get married, have children, and live the rest of your life in peace." Chapter 931. The swordsmen of the shaking Shadowland began to chase each other to break through to the next realm. Actually, it wasn't just the shaking shadow swordsmen. The entire Jean Dan group in the upper realm of Zhou Xian also began to attempt to break through to the next realm. All of a sudden, the price of resources needed to break through to the next realm skyrocketed. Among them, the rare and precious items were even harder to find. Along with this, the price of building one's foundation also began to rise. The logic behind this was that since there was a possibility of a change in the era, then it was inevitable that there would be a change in the spiritual items of heaven and earth. No one would think of increasing, only reducing. Under the push of the merchants, the price rose steadily. Only the merchants continued to accumulate wealth without stopping. Lu Xiaoyi felt that among the 36 innate great Taos, there should be a place for the Tao of commerce. Even if these people didn't have a change in their great Tao, they would still rush towards Jean Dan, rushed towards Jin Dan, rushed towards Yuanying, rushed towards Yuanying. But with this change, they became more anxious psychologically. He didn't know if this was a good thing or a bad thing. Lu Xiaoyi also couldn't tell, but he felt that a certain sense of urgency was necessary. Especially for these swordsmen who took pleasure in the sword every day, they actually had a lot of time to allocate. He himself also began to work hard on the progress of his cultivation. The shocking shattering of the heavens at the Yulon Buddhist conference had shattered his cultivation to the late stage of Jin Dan. Regrettably, he didn't have time to compose a breakthrough poem, so he wasn't in the mood to do so now. He had already been stuck in the middle stage of the Oris core realm for many years. Now that he had the complete Big Dipper scripture, as well as the inverse space cultivation method from the constellation Ocean Treasure Mirror, his cultivation progress began to soar at a rapid pace. Misfortune and fortune depended on each other, and fortune and misfortune hid within each other. Luckily, he had broken through the Danpool void barrier, which meant that such a barrier wouldn't appear again. This meant that he could boldly increase his cultivation without worrying about any hidden dangers. Whether it was the Big Dipper scripture or the constellation Ocean Treasure Mirror, they were all top-notch authentic Taoist teachings in the cultivation world. There was no problem in controlling the rhythm, and he could bravely advance. When Lu Xiaoyi immersed himself in cultivation, it was as if the entire Zhou Upper Realms Jin Dan was immersed in cultivation as well. No one was stupid. What the four of them could think of in Wanfo back then, the other Jin Dan could also think of it. For Yuanying and Jinjuan, the most important problem was how to prolong their lives. Then, he would take a step forward at the right time. For half-immortals, apart from thinking of ways to live longer, if they really couldn't persevere, they would try to fuse with the Tao, fuse with the innate great Tao. This was something that they didn't even dare to think about in the past, but now they were very clear about which great Tao had gaps. Of course, whether or not they could merge was another matter. They had to try before they would be satisfied. To Jin Dan, nothing else mattered. The upper realm was the only thing that mattered. Only by taking a step forward could they truly enter the great tide of changes in the era, and be qualified to pursue their own destiny. In the bounded domain, when the Jin Dan were no longer passionate about fighting, the entire world became quiet. Just like what Hairlip said, it was actually a rare period of peace after the cultivation world was established in the bounded domain. Everyone became polite and orderly, and there were very few cultivators who traveled outside to play with cats and dogs. The only question was, how long would this peace last? Fifth ring, 3 Pure Palace. A handsome Taoist walked out of the main hall and bowed slightly to the Jinjuan who came to send him off. "Thank you for sending me off, Martial Uncle. The goods have been ordered, and the spirit has been paid. I shall return to the mountain now." "Please go back, Martial Uncle." The Taoist smiled slightly. "Martial Nephew Guan Yao, take care. When I return, I will send my greetings to the Jinjuan in the dome. If you have time, the Sword Vein is always welcome to visit the 3 Pure Palace." Seeing that the swordsman turned into sword light and disappeared, Dragon Broker's expression slowly became cold. After a moment of melancholy, he sighed and turned back to the 3 Pure Palace. In the palace, there were several Yuanying immortals standing solemnly. Dragon Broker was reading the files by himself. Several Yuanying immortals stood solemnly for a long time. They couldn't bear it anymore. One of them stepped out, saluted and asked, "Martial Uncle, 500 kilograms of Xinjiang gum essence. And it was already refined. How could it be sold at such a price? The Xianyuan sword sex receiver crystal production on Hasa Star was only this much. Are they sure that they can beat us? The 3 Pure Palace and the Sword Vein have been fighting for tens of thousands of years, and they have never been so aggrieved. Xuanyuan's sword is sharp, but are the techniques of the 3 Pure Palace easy to deal with?" Dragon Broker put down the file, looked up, and saw that the 5 Yuanying immortals were all angry. He sighed. He needed to explain. After all, they were the main people in charge of managing the conflicts in the realm. "You said that the 3 Pure Palace had never been so aggrieved when facing the Sword Vein. You are wrong! In fact, there was a period of time more than 10,000 years ago when the three pure palace felt even more aggrieved when facing the Xianyuan than now. Do you know why? One of the Yuanying immortals was quick-witted. Martial uncle, are you talking about the several thousand years when Xianyuan was at the peak of that sword lunatic? Dragon Broker sighed. Yes. In that period, when that sword lunatic attacked, there was no one who could withstand his sword. Young god, half immortal, fifth decay, second severance. There was no one who could block his sharpness. The three pure palace could not be found, nor could the Supreme One. There was no one in this universe, and there was no one in that universe. The unspeakable lands were also the places where other half-immortals were active. There was no place that he did not dare to cause trouble, yet no one could stop him. He even dared to kill the immortal beasts of the celestial court. In the cultivation world, strength is revered. If a sect or force has such a person who can sweep through the world with his own strength, then he is worthy of respect. If you can't beat him, then you can only cower. What reason is there to talk about? One of the Yuanying immortals said weakly. That was 10,000 years ago. Later, didn't he self-destruct after Tao integration? He is no longer alive, so there is no reason for us to continue to fear him, right? In these 10,000 years, haven't we been on equal footing with Xianyuan again? We have not softened our backs, so why are we suddenly? Dragon Broker sucked in a deep breath. Yes, you are right. Originally, after that sword lunatic obtained innate Tao and Tao, the ancestors of the three pure palace directly passed down a decree from the immortal court, warning us not to strangle our relationship with Xianyuan, this sword vein. At first, we thought that after several tens of thousands of years of struggle, Xianyuan would finally be able to suppress us three pure palace with his own strength. In the end, we did not expect that this person would become world-weary and self-destruct. Since he is no longer alive, it is naturally impossible for us three pure palace to continue to submit. That is why we three pure palace have been able to make a comeback in these 10,000 years. The enlightened masters listened quietly, knowing that their uncle was about to speak of the key point. Dragon Broker changed the topic. You all know about the fragment of virtue a few days ago. As the saying goes, one can be two, but not three. The collapse of three innate Tao in 10,000 years is enough to prove something. I will speak the truth. The possibility of changing epochs is very high. This is also the conclusion of the sect, and you all know it very well. What you all do not know is that since changing epochs could be a trend, then as the initiator, that immortal who was the first to shatter Tao and Tao, his heart is worthy of death. Can you still think that he is merely world-weary? Our five-ring three pure palace has a deep understanding of this person. Regarding his past, not even a single scripture pavilion can contain it. After 10,000 years, countless great cultivators have been studying his path to immortality, and the more they study, the more unfathomable it is. The more terrifying it is. With the fragment of virtue, all the true monarchs unanimously believe that this was the true intention of that sword lunatic. How is it world-weary? He has played us all. He has played the mortal world and the cultivation world. He has also played the immortal world. If this inference is correct, and he is not world-weary, then what is this person's next move? Think about it. Chapter 932. A Yuanying trembled in fear. You mean this person, this immortal is still alive? There's still a chance of him reappearing? In the next epoch? Dragon Broker let out a long breath. I didn't say that. The possibility isn't high. Because all the gods and Buddhas are watching, so there's no way he could fake his death. But we have to consider this worst-case scenario. This is the survival of a sect. So if a mere 500 kilograms of Xinjiang gum essence can ease the tension between us to a certain extent, why not do it? Do the three pure ones lack this much essence? The three pure ones suddenly realized that he was right. If the worst-case scenario really did happen, what use would it be even if it was 10,000 kilograms or 100,000 kilograms? The relationship in the cultivation world was based on a steady flow of water in normal times, not a last-minute effort at the last minute. Dragon Broker calmed down. Actually, you don't have to worry too much. According to the sect's judgment, even if the worst-case scenario happens, it will definitely happen after the epoch changes. Before that, with all the gods and Buddhas watching, no one will be able to do anything. But the collapse of the Great Tao is a fact, and the trend is obvious. The fifth ring has always made a living by plundering in the universe. We've made countless enemies over the past 10,000 years. There are plenty of people who want to take revenge. Usually, it's hard for the cultivation world of the universe to gather in one place, but if the Great Tao collapses, many impossibilities will become possible. Under such circumstances, the internal strife of the fifth ring has to stop, because our enemies are outside. This is the overall situation. Recently, the entire fifth ring's upper echelons have been discussing this matter, and they'll soon come up with a rule to restrict the behavior of the people in the domain. You have to be mentally prepared. As for this essence, it's just a show of sincerity in advance. Understood? Everyone nodded. That's right, it's not suitable for internal strife now. The people of the fifth ring were very powerful in this aspect. They could switch their battle mode anytime, anywhere. When there was an external threat, there would never be internal strife, because an external war meant another banquet of plundering. This was a huge trap. Whenever outsiders felt that the fifth ring was having internal strife and wanted to take advantage of the chaos, they would often fall into this trap and be unable to extricate themselves. For tens of thousands of years, they had cheated countless people. This time, who knew who they would cheat this time? Azure Sky, Land of Exile, Outer Space Crack. Since the large-scale invasion 200 years ago, under the leadership of Heaven-defying sect, Blood River sect, and Gu Alliance, the cultivators of the Land of Exile strengthened their control of the crack. That mistake allowed dozens of foreign cultivators to sneak into the Land of Exile and stir up trouble. Later, with the help of the main sect Xianyuan, they were captured and killed one by one. Although the foreign cultivators were strong, they were still unable to withstand a single blow from the Xianyuan swordsman. Now, the poison stream had been purged long ago, and the past events had turned into smoke. However, the lessons left behind were still fresh in the minds of the exiled natives, and they did not dare to slack off. On this day, a few Jean Dan patrolling around the crack found 3 people outside the crack. 2 men and 1 woman, sneakily sticking their heads out and looking around. A cultivator who had just joined the patrol was about to step forward and interrogate him when he was pulled back by his companion. Don't be rash. Don't you see that they are carrying sword sheaths? The reckless cultivator bitterly smiled. I'm sorry. I didn't notice. Xianyuan swordsmen had a very high status in the Land of Exile. Firstly, it was because of their strength, and secondly, they had no desires for the Land of Exile. After tens of thousands of years, the exiled natives had long regarded them as reliable protectors. Xianyuan swordsmen also lived up to their status, and had never disappointed anyone. They probably came here because they were curious about the crack, right? After all, it was one of the rare things in the Land of Exile that did not exist in the main world. They said that it's here. It's just a rough location. The crack changes slightly every 3 years, and greatly every 10 years. Now that 200 years have passed, I'm afraid that the inside has changed beyond recognition. The female cultivator Jean Dan was at the initial stage. She exuded a heroic aura, and was the only one among the 3 who did not carry a sword sheath. Of the 2 male cultivators, one glanced at her coldly, and did not say a word. The other was talkative. Junior sister Xiaoya! You can't come out after entering this place, right? If it were me, I wouldn't go in. Why bother? Master Lu was also careless. This is not something that can be dealt with a sword. The cold swordsman glanced at him. So you can only be a passerby of the cultivation world, and not the main character. Senior brother has been in there for 200 years, and isn't he still fine? His soul lamp is getting stronger and stronger? Is that something that can be done by staying in the crack all the time? He has already gone out. I'm a swordsman, and my fate is in my own hands, not in the hands of the heavens. The ice guest retorted. I'm not afraid, I'm just a little bad with directions. I can't even fly in the sea, not to mention the crack in space. But if I was there at that time, I definitely wouldn't have let Master Lu go in alone. I would have followed him. Li Peinan sneered. Don't. Luckily you weren't there at that time. If you really went in with him, I'm afraid that both your soul lamps would have been extinguished. The ice guest was not convinced. Senior brother, don't you think that's a little too much? I'm not the boy of misfortune, I'm not that unlucky. Li Peinan was not polite at all. You may not be unlucky, but the people with you are unlucky. I have such a tough life, and in these 200 years, how many times have I almost died? But you didn't even lose a single hair. Wait, junior sister, step back. Li Peinan moved quickly, pulling Huang Xia's body that was too close to him, and retreated until they were more than 10 miles away. The ice guest beside him also followed with a blank face. Huang Xia was a little confused. Senior brotherly, why is that? Is there any danger? If something really jumped out from the crack, we should be able to feel it in advance, right? Li Peinan acted like a veteran. I also don't know what kind of danger might happen. But it's always good to stay away from the crack. Junior sister, you don't know, the crack itself is fine. But if this guy is standing beside you, then there must be a problem. Before he finished speaking, the crack layer suddenly stretched and shrank strangely, like a pendulum, stretching out a few miles, and then shrank back immediately. The shrinkage covered the area, including the place where the three of them were standing just now. This was a small eruption caused by the imbalance of energy inside the crack. If the three of them were still standing there, they would have been sucked into the crack by now. Huang Xia was a little surprised and doubtful. Senior brotherly, I remember that this is your first time to be exiled to the crack, right? Why are you more familiar with it than I, who have been here many times? Li Peinan was proud. This is my first time here. I'm not familiar with the crack. But I'm familiar with this unlucky ice guest. When you're with him, if you don't be more careful, even 10 lives won't be enough. Junior sister, how do you think I survived for more than 200 years? It's a bloody history. Chapter 933. P.S. Looking for a guaranteed monthly ticket. Huang Xiaoya brought along the vigilant Li Peinan and the resentful Bingke to travel and gain experience in the land of exile. Other than the crack in the sky, there was also the dragon boat competition. These were all tracks that Lu Xie had walked on before. She had formed her Oris core just a few decades ago. She just didn't know if she should call that guy senior brother or martial uncle. After forming the Jin Dan, her horizons were broadened. She had a deeper understanding of the letter that guy left behind. She knew that now was not the time to take it out. She was very sure. The cultivation world changed very quickly. It was so fast that what that guy thought was a big deal might not be so important now. Although she was in the blue sky realm, she was still very well informed. The judgment of the fifth ring was immediately sent back to her hometown, the blue sky realm. Therefore, the entire realm was in a state of high alert. Relatively speaking, there were very few disputes in the realm. Just like the fifth ring, this place quickly adjusted its strategy. In a sense, the blue sky realm was the master of the fifth ring. The change was effortless. The three of them still had no plans to go to the fifth ring. This was also the reason why they could finally get together. There were too few promising cultivators who were willing to stay in the blue sky realm. This was a very small circle. If that guy was included, there would be a special circle. Protect the blue sky. This was the meaning of their existence. This time, the meditation lasted for 100 years. It was the longest period of meditation in Lu Xiaoyi's life. To him, it was a record, but in fact, for cultivators in the Jin Dan realm, it was normal. Which Jin Dan cultivator had not gone into seclusion like this? Not to mention 100 years, even 200 or 300 years were not uncommon. Not everyone fooled around outside as frequently as he did in the past. Of course, other people's seclusion was like guarding a cave. They would not give up until they reached their goal. He, on the other hand, was guarding an entire continent. This was already not easy for him. In the 100 years, a lot of exciting news came. Miss Yin Yang was the first to break through to the next realm. Lu Xiaoyi was lucky enough to play the role of being abandoned. It was worth it. Then came senior sister Kawa. Everything was plain, simple, and logical. Lu Xiaoyi didn't find anything special about this senior sister during his interactions with her. The only thing that left a deep impression on him was her sense of responsibility, whether it was toward her sect or toward her friends. But such cultivators should be the mainstream of successful cultivators, right? Those who are good at fighting have no illustrious achievements, and those who are good at cultivation have no great fame. Xia Bingji was the third. As expected, her rationality and calmness allowed her to keep everything under control. Everything had a plan. Perhaps she lacked some brilliance, but she had always been on the right path. What made Lu Xiaoyi a little jealous was that the two female cultivators of the Yellow Court succeeded after abandoning him. One was abandonment in reality, and the other was abandonment in spirit. This made him unconsciously feel resentful. Without his help to adjust her yin and yang, could Miss Xia have safely passed this stage? Next was Qin Xian. Lu Xiaoyi was not surprised. In terms of breaking through to the next realm, no one dared to claim to be the first among the orthodox Taoist disciples. Especially the orthodox of the orthodox, the oldest and most ancient Taoist three pristines. For this reason, he sent a sincere congratulatory message, and at the same time, pushed the responsibility of being a spy on Zhou Xian without any psychological pressure. If one's ability was strong, one should have more responsibilities. What's wrong with that? Harelip was the last. There was nothing much to say. As the core of a big sect, success was expected. If not, it would be a surprise. Ascending from the core formation stage to the nascent soul stage was a huge hurdle. No matter which sector or universe one was in, the odds of success were extremely low. Not even 1 out of 10. But these friends of his saw the difficult road as a smooth road. It was not that the probability had changed, but that they were originally the cream of the crop. Needless to say, Qin Xian's Harelip was the leader of the thousands of Jin Dan in each sect. To be able to sit in this position was harder than forming a nascent soul. So their success was not strange at all. Not even 1 out of 10 referred to those huge ordinary cultivators as the denominator. The 3 Kun cultivators were the same. They were all outstanding talents, and with a little bit of luck, my luck was all rubbed off on me. Lu Xiaoyi thought fiercely. In his understanding, there were a few others who had rubbed off on his luck. In the Yaoying swordsman group, there were Che Xie, Song Rong, Zhou Fan, and 2 other swordsmen. This caused the strength of the Yaoying Sword Palace to swell. Including Taoist Master Mao, there were a total of 6 Yuanying. Among the 3,000 side sects in Zhouxian, they were firmly in the middle. If there were another 1 or 2 perfected sovereigns, it was not strange. He had close to 200 Jin Dan under him. After the battle in the upper forest, there were many individual swordsmen who came to join him. He did not reject them. Out of the 200 Jin Dan, only 5 Yuanying was out of them. It was really not a lot. There would be more in the future. That was what he thought. Among the 9 sword vein, the Yaoying Sword Palace was faintly showing signs of strength. Behind the chessboard of heaven and earth, the other 8 sword vein were licking their wounds and lying dormant. However, the new Yaoying sword vein continued to maintain a high profile. Furthermore, it was invincible, and perfectly aligned with the true meaning of swordsman. Men walked to the bottom, and water flowed to the top. Lu Xiaoyi had chosen the right direction, and in this era, there would be a gathering of heroes. More importantly, with the collapse of the Great Tao, the future cultivation world would be in chaos. The only ones who would be able to survive were those with power. In this turbulent era, there was a limit to what an individual could do. This was also the reason why large numbers of individual cultivators had begun to seek out their masters. Once the pole was unveiled, all would follow. At the right time, at the right place, with the right strategy, and in the right environment, it was like the poor people who had been driven mad by excessive taxes. When someone raised their arms and called for help, the general trend was there. Even the other sword-vein disciples were filled with yearning. This was because they had heard that once they entered the new Yaoying sword vein, they would be able to learn the sword inheritance of air. This sort of temptation was irresistible. Their rise was also unstoppable. The only problem was that air, the god in everyone's hearts, was still awkwardly pausing at the Jin Dan. This left everyone speechless. As a god, shouldn't reaching the upper realm be as easy as drinking cold water? This baby's heart was bitter, but he couldn't tell anyone else. Actually, he didn't have much to complain about. This was because it wasn't as if he hadn't gained anything in the past 100 years. Currently, his cultivation had reached the peak of the Jin Dan. In terms of hardware, he had met the requirements to break through to the next realm, but in terms of mental state, it was hard to say. In theory, after Jin Dan's cultivation reached the peak, it would still take hundreds of years to settle down, feel, remove the impurities, and then search for its own destiny. Looking at this process, compared to the genius cultivators who were about the same age as him, such as Hairlip, Qin Xian, Xia Bingji, and the others, he was about 200 years later. This was the extreme imbalance between cultivation and technique. Chapter 934. P.S. Looking for a guaranteed monthly ticket. Lu Xiaoyi was embarrassed, but the new Yuanying swordsmen were not. They still called him Sword Master because they still could not defeat him. The more embarrassing it was, the more ruthless it would be. Until now, the new Yuanying were not willing to fight with him. Originally, they were happy to fight with him, but now, they could not wait to avoid him. However, Lu Xiaoyi knew that this was only temporary. If he could not reach the upper realm, his future would never be as vast as these swordsmen's. This was a fact. The Yuanying were sent to the void of the universe under Dao Master Mao's lead. This was a path that they had to take. Originally, he wanted to lead them himself, but now, he did not have the ability to leave the universe. It was good to struggle on his own. There would be a day when he could leave earlier than later because the order of the universe would become more and more chaotic. In the past 100 years, not only had he reached the peak of Jin Dan in terms of cultivation, he had also reached the peak in terms of swordsmanship. After 100 years of polishing, his swordsmanship had become sharper and more restrained. In the past, his swordsmanship would change the color of the sky, but now, it was quiet and ordinary. It was because of this ordinary swordsmanship that he beat up the Yuanying swordsmen until they were crying for their parents. In terms of swordsmanship, he had already taken a crucial step in the path of simplicity. In the past 100 years, he would spend a few hours every day in his little world to observe how the Tai Pu core meteorite formed a world. This was also a process that involved many changes in the Tao. Not only the 5 elements, but also yin, yang, time, space, creation, lightning, primal chaos, origin, Tai Yi, Tai Chu, Tai Shi, Tai Su, and Tai Chi. This was actually the process of forming a small universe that did not involve any living beings. Unlike when he was in a hurry in the Grand Plane realm, where many things were fleeting and changed too quickly, and he was unable to recall them one by one. Here, he could do as he wished, and he would not let go of any details that interested him. This was because he had plenty of time. This was a process of fully understanding the nature of the universe. Compared to his realm, it was a little early, but it still benefited him a lot. In this process, the Tai Pu ancient spirit was also growing together with him. Observe this world together. From the original master and servant relationship to the current inseparable relationship, the ancient spirit had been urging him, hoping that it could completely integrate into him during the process of forming a nascent soul. Only then would it be able to obtain eternal life in another form. However, Lu Xiaoyi wasn't sure if he already had the conditions to break through. Under normal circumstances, after cultivators reached the peak of Jin Dan, they would have at least 100 years to settle down. Take Qing Xian, Rabbit Lipsin Ye Kawa Xia Bingji for example. When he met them, they were basically at the late, or even peak of Jin Dan. It was normal for them to settle down for 100 years before they started to break into the upper realm. Did he have to use a normal rhythm to demand himself? Somehow, he had a feeling that other people would settle down after reaching the peak of their cultivation, but he would settle down from the beginning to the end. Ever since he had formed the Jin Dan, he had been tempering his state of mind. Through the way of swordsmanship, through the way of battle, through the way of events, he was completely certain that what others had experienced during the Jin Dan period was far from what he had experienced. In the 400 years since he had formed his gold core, he had almost never been idle. It was almost as if he had been causing trouble along the way. In that case, did he still need to experience, battle, experience, and settle down like others? It was just a different method. Normal people would settle down at the end, but he had been doing it all along. This was his thought. He still hadn't completely strengthened his confidence. He needed to think carefully. In the process of thinking, he could also go out and relax. He definitely couldn't find those friends who had already formed their nascent souls to relax. There was no way to relax. If he didn't fight, he would feel awkward. If he fought, they would feel awkward. He might as well not meet them. There was another person who was in the same predicament as him. After 200 years, he had achieved nothing and struggled bitterly. Yes, this person could be met. At least he could be comforted psychologically. I'm not the only one who is incompetent, there's someone who is inferior to me. Qingwei Continent, Qingwei Mountain. Qingwei Qi floated like an immortal. Among the 9 great sacred mountains of the Zhou-Xian upper realm, Qingwei Mountain was undoubtedly the most immortal. It wasn't without reason that they boasted themselves as the #1 Taoist mountain. Soaring through the long rainbow, soaring straight to the towering rock gate of the Han dynasty. Pine and cypress hung on the precipice, turtle and kun hid in the bottomless abyss. The rain shrouded the green phoenix, adding drops of jade, and the red clouds swayed in the pond. On this day, a cultivator from the outer land came to Jiu Hall outside Qingwei Mountain. He was clean, confident, and at ease. The first impression he gave was that he was clean and neat, without a speck of dust on his body, and without a single ornament. In Qingwei Immortal Sect, receiving cultivators from the outer land was a very common daily affair. There were disciples from the outer land who came to make friends, disciples from other branches who came to seek knowledge, and those who recommended their strength to enter the sect. There were all kinds of people. Every day, the cultivator on duty at Jiu Hall would receive hundreds of such visitors, but their attitude was always warm and genial. This was the temperament of a visitor, and it was something that the nouveau riche could never compare to. The young cultivator walked into the main hall and faced Taoist Qingwei's reception. He spoke as if he was familiar with him. "I'm looking for a slug. This fellow owes me a gambling debt and refuses to come out of the sect. Is there such a logic in this world?" The reception Taoist was startled and immediately reacted. Slug was not a very formal title. In fact, it was a joking title given by the Jin Dan group to several outstanding Jin Dan figures in the cultivation world, such as Rabbit Crack Lip, Big and Small Eyes, One Ear, Morning Clothes, and so on. For example, Slug had such a nickname because he had cultivated a magical snorting breath, which was how he got his name. This title was already a little outdated because among the famous faces, some had died, and some had reached the upper realm. They had gradually become quasi-historical figures. The reception Taoist was very experienced. Hearing his words, it was more likely that he was an old friend, so he did not take it seriously. Fellow Taoist you are? Carefree one ear! That cultivator laughed. Among the faces, only these two were still at the Jin Dan level and had not reached the upper realm. Did they come here to drink and complain about their misery? So it's Senior Marshal Brother Sean. You're an honored guest, so I should personally lead the way. The two of them flew into the sect, one in front and one behind. Lu Xiai spoke. That fellow hasn't reached the nascent soul stage, right? Otherwise, I wouldn't have looked for him. I'm too lazy to listen to his self-praising nonsense. The cultivator laughed. Not yet, not yet. The two of you are just right. However, Senior Brother Slug has been in a bad mood recently. He's a little irritable and often beats and scolds. We don't dare to get close to him. Lu Xiai smiled. I'm also in a bad mood. Let's fight first to dampen his irritation. That cultivator sighed in his heart. For cultivators, especially cultivators of their status, it would be strange if they were in a good mood when they saw that the cultivators who used to be shoulder to shoulder with them had improved while they stayed where they were. Cultivation was cruel. It did not care whether you were famous or not. Chapter 935. P.S. Looking for a guaranteed monthly ticket. In front of a cave, the cultivator who led the way pointed at it from afar and then left. This was a solitary cave, which was in line with Slug's position in Jin Dan. Of course, it was more in line with his current state of mind. He wasn't hiding in a cave, but was circulating his energy in the formation in front of the cave with his hair disheveled. His disheveled hair didn't indicate how bad his current state was. When cultivators were fully focused on circulating their inner secrets, they would often experience this kind of physiological imbalance, either growing too quickly or too slowly. Because he was fully focused on cultivation and didn't have time to take care of himself, he appeared to be in a sorry state, but it wasn't a problem. Feeling that someone had intruded into the cave formation, Slug's ferocious gaze landed on him. His fellow apprentices all knew of his current situation, so no one would come to disturb him. The words of his elders were like a letter, so they definitely wouldn't come. This was... Lu Xiaoyi saw his ghastly appearance and laughed heartily. Slug, the heavenly Tao favors decent people. With your conduct, you won't be able to pass the test of your appearance. Don't waste your energy. Go back to the furnace and rebuild. Slug's ferocious gaze immediately vanished after seeing this person. He hated his former friends the most when they came to visit him. Hairlip came once, but he didn't even see him before he was chased away. Among all the friends he valued, this was the only one. Yes, he couldn't beat him, but he had something in common. If I go back to the furnace and rebuild, you won't be much stronger than me. Slug decisively stopped his cultivation and took out a wine pot. These days had been tough, and he didn't even have someone to talk to. The person in front of him was in the same situation as him. Big brother and second brother were both frustrated people. They didn't have much time left. He was already close to 700 years old, and this year was over 600 years old. Jin Dan's lifespan was limited to 800 years. If there was a slight difference, it would be more difficult in the future. This wasn't a joke. The two of them sat opposite each other and drank, but they didn't mention the details of the Grand Realm. That was their own privacy and shouldn't be borrowed from others. They only talked about romance and cultivation anecdotes. Of course, the most popular topic was the collapse of the Great Tao. There's a fight outside. Over the past 200 years, the order of the universe's void has become more and more chaotic. My Zhou Xian upper realm's restraint on the surrounding regions has also become weaker and weaker. The Mountain Gate has already set a rule that when a major cultivator goes out, he must travel with at least 2 people. I, Qingwei, am the same. You, Xiaoyao, have a similar rule, Slug said with melancholy. Lu Xiaoyi took a sip of wine. I'm still not strong enough. My subordinates aren't strong enough. It's just that I have an extra messenger. I like to walk alone. Whether I hit or stay, I do as I please. If there's someone beside me, are you going to care or not? The battle in the cultivation world is not a matter of how many people there are. Slug nodded. Elite Gene Dan players like them had long developed their own habits in battle. In fact, they were very unwilling to cooperate with others. How many Yuanying did your Yaoying Sword Palace produce? 5. That's normal, isn't it? I have almost 200 Gene Dan there now. Slug shook his head. It's not normal. The difference between those who come from the inner sect and those who come from the side sect is greater than you can imagine. It's not only in terms of resources, but also in terms of experience and insight. Also, of your so-called 200 Gene Dan players, how many of them are at the peak of Gene Dan? How many of them have experienced the accumulation of time? The last time I saw them, they weren't even 20 years old. Don't you find it strange that there are 5 Yuanying players among such a small number of people? Lu Xiaoyu was somewhat speechless. I've been staying in the Yaoying Sword Palace these days. I've rarely returned to the Carefree Mountain. Slug snorted. Behind closed doors. You don't know the major events of the world. Let me tell you, the sect's true monarchs have done statistics on this. In these 200 years, the probability of reaching the nascent soul stage has increased. Do you know what this means? Lu Shi narrowed his eyes. The heavenly Tao is relaxing the rules. Slug sighed. Yes, although your eyes are blind, your heart isn't blind. The heavenly Tao is relaxing the rules in 2 ways. First, the great Tao is lacking. The more lacking it is, the more incomplete the heavenly Tao is. There are more opportunities to take advantage of and more opportunities to climb up. Second, consumption. Just like in the mortal world, when the population increases, there will be wars. Conversely, the expansion of wars will also stimulate reproduction. It's the same in the cultivation world. It's precisely because it's anticipated that there will be large-scale cultivation wars that the threshold for reaching the upper realm has been lowered. Lu Xiaoyu laughed. The threshold has been lowered. Why can't you go up, Slug? Slug raised his eyebrows. I'm being strict with myself. How can I compare to them? You only know how to attack me. You're awesome, you're awesome. Why don't you go up? Lu Xiaoyu waved his hand. How can a swallow know the ambition of a swan? I'm a man aiming for the 36 connate great Taos. How can I force myself to do it half-heartedly? Slug sneered. Wait until you become a half-immortal before you brag, okay? Just in my Qingwei immortal sect alone, the number of nascent soul cultivators in the past 200 years has exceeded 100. How terrifying! When these people become nascent souls, they must go to the void of the universe to gain experience. When they encounter Yuanying in the outer domain, dozens of them have died in the past 200 years. How many of them can survive in the end? It's a big mess. Lu Xie asked. How's the Buddhist sect? Is there any movement? Slug shook his head. I don't know. I'm not paying attention. You don't have to worry about your new Yuanying stage. It's chaotic outside now. If it's chaotic inside the realm, it won't be long before the dynasty changes and the era restarts. It's still very early. Do you think the Buddhist sect has so much trouble and has time to pay attention to your little Yuanying stage? There are also many perfected monarchs. Then, are there any sun gods who have taken another step forward? Slug laughed strangely. On the contrary, there are fewer perfected monarchs in Yuanying than in the same period in history. There isn't a single sun god who has cultivated to the half-immortal level. They are the opposite of mid-level and low-level cultivators. We're sharpening our heads to drill in, while they hide if they can and retreat if they can. They're afraid that they'll overdo it and reach the end of their lifespan. If the era hasn't changed, wouldn't they die before dawn? The two of them chatted as they drank. No matter how unrestrained they were, they couldn't escape the fact that they hadn't formed their nascent souls. Grapes that couldn't be eaten were always sour. Things like strict requirements for oneself and loosening the threshold were just excuses to comfort oneself. flattering each other, comforting each other, hugging each other for warmth. That was their true nature. They drank until the sky turned dark, but they still didn't get drunk. The Taoist who received Lu Xiaoyi did his duty. A day later, he came back to take a look from afar. In the end, he found two people drinking to drown their sorrows. He knew that he couldn't afford to disturb them, so he sneaked away and warned his fellow disciples. Two drunkards are the ones you can't afford to offend more than one drunkard. 3 days later, Slug, whose eyes were getting brighter and brighter, spoke mysteriously. Brother Air, I have a place to go, and it's very dangerous. However, there's also a strange challenge. I don't know what to do, so I plan to go and give it a try. Brother, do you dare to go with me? Chapter 936. P.S. Looking for a guaranteed monthly ticket. Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. Do you need someone to collect your corpse? No problem. As your brother, I'll give you a coffin. It seemed like the slug had this intention all along. It was not a drunken fantasy. The core of the Sea of Stars is an energy field similar to a black hole. This is common knowledge that has been passed down in the world. However, common knowledge does not equate to the truth. At the very least, it's not the entire truth. After taking another big gulp, the slug's eyes grew brighter and brighter. There are countless great cultivators in the upper realm of Zhou. To cultivators, exploring the unknown is their instinct. With such a huge treasure, how could no one have explored and excavated it for hundreds of thousands of years? Rogue cultivators don't have a strong enough system power, connections, and resources, so their exploration is limited. Even if they occasionally gain something, the truth will be buried in the dust of history along with their own deaths. However, the 9 great upper sects are different. The slug pointed at Lu Xiaoyi. My sect, your sect, and in fact, all the upper sects, in Zhou Xian's long history, have organized several expeditions to the core of the Sea of Stars. What they obtained were the core secrets of their sects. Not to mention the rogue cultivators, even the Yuanying of our sect is rarely known. The truth stops at the level of a perfected lord. It's also because they have a part of the secrets of the Sea of Stars core that the 9 great upper sects are unwilling to share this secret with more people. You know how powerful the great sects are. Therefore, the various terrors of the Sea of Stars core are quietly spread through different channels to prevent more people from revealing the secrets. What's spread outside is the legend of the inexplicable dangers of this place, and the legend of no return. Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. Brother Snot, which ancestor did you flatter to get this secret out? The slug snorted. You don't have to investigate my methods. The secrets of the Sea of Stars core can never be fully understood by humans. What humans have obtained over hundreds of thousands of years is probably only a part of it, and a very small part at that. What I got from the ancestor was only a small part of it. But I don't want to go to the core. I'm just going to take a turn at the edge of the core of the universe. If that's all, it will be enough. Lu Xiaoyi's expression turned solemn. Slug, don't try to fool me with false words. When I was telling lies, you were still a pure boy. You came to find me because you didn't dare to tell the sect, right? If he said it, he would definitely not allow it, and might even ground you, right? If you need someone to accompany you, it means that you're not confident, and just want someone to help you when you're in danger? Yuanying won't mess around with you, and you don't trust Jean Dan, so you came to me. Are you trying to goad me? Look at me, do I look like someone who can be provoked? Hurry up and tell me the truth, including everything that your ancestors said. Only when you tell me the truth will I know what to do. At the very least, I will be more confident when I fish you out. The slug knew that he couldn't hide anything from this cunning person, which was why he only spoke to this ear. Among his friends in the same realm, this ear was the most trustworthy, the most powerful, and the most likely to help him. He had nothing to hide. In fact, these things were also known to the great cultivators of the carefree travel realm. It was not a secret of the Qingwei immortal sect, but a secret of the perfected cultivators of the 9 great sects. In this sense, they were like 2 mischievous children of the 2 families who eavesdropped on the secrets of their elders. The core of the universe is actually not just a core. It also has a volume of up to thousands of miles. According to the ancestor, it is divided into 4 parts: the halo, the shell, the pulp, and the core. The real fatal part starts from the shell. It required absolute strength to enter and not get lost. So far, among the great cultivators of Zhou Xian, even the most powerful young spirit has only gone a short distance into the pulp of the star. No one has ever entered the core. Our experience is mainly in the first 3 layers, and what I'm going to do is just the outermost layer of the halo. I'm going there to find an opportunity to reach the nascent soul stage, not to seek death. If I go further in, I will not go there even if you beat me to death. Lu Xiaoyi was still not satisfied. Individual cultivators say that the core of the universe is a place of death. This should not be empty talk. They are bold, and the dangerous place is also a place of opportunity. Which cultivator doesn't know that? There must be countless individual cultivators who have tried it, and only gave up when they really couldn't return. Then, why do they see the core of the universe as a place of death, but you think you can still find opportunities in the halo? The slug laughed. This is what I'm going to tell you next. Individual cultivators of unorthodox sects only think that getting close to the core of the universe requires one's realm, magic power, divine soul, and tools. They think that it is the same as a normal cultivator's battle, relying on strength. Of course, they are right. It does rely on strength, but it is not the strength they think it is. The real way to come and go freely in the core of the universe is mystery. To be more precise, it is the cultivator's control of the power of providence. Everyone has a ball of providence that appears, but not everyone knows how to use it. Only the perfected monarchs of the 9 sects have dabbled in this aspect. As for the others, even if they are perfected monarchs of unorthodox sects, they do not have the foundation and experience in this aspect. They are also clueless when they go to the core of the universe. Lu Xiaoyi's eyes widened. Slug, you dare to steal a perfected monarch's cultivation technique? Do you think we can learn that? The slug shook his head. How can the matter of cultivators be called stealing if they take a cultivation technique? That is called an exuberant thirst for knowledge and an unrelenting spirit of improvement. Are you going to read it or not? If you don't, the wine will be finished. You can go on your own. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Why do I have to be a thief? I have a pure ear, so how can it be ruined by your hands? I won't read it. I will definitely not read it. I will not read it even if you beat me to death. I will never read it even if I go to the upper realm. Slug looked at the hypocrite and said, Then why don't you leave? No one is holding you back. Lu Xiaoyi seemed to be in a difficult position. How can I give up on my friendship? I can't bear to see you jump into the tiger's den while I, as your friend, watch from the side. Well, since my innocence has been ruined, I will reluctantly sacrifice myself for my friend. The slug threw an antique jade slip over. He knew this thing too well. Innocence? It was already AF*King mess. He just didn't know where to steal this thing. If he knew, he would be faster than him. They were like-minded, jackals of the same tribe. He didn't completely steal it. This thing was only obtained by chance in his early years. He didn't expect that it would become his only possibility to go to the upper realm. It was also the will of heaven. This thing wasn't a complete secret of the sect. Qingwei had it, and so did Xiaoyao. Maybe there were 2 copies. Well, it was very likely that there were 9 copies, so it couldn't be considered a leak. Well, it could only be considered a mutual curiosity. Chapter 937. P.S. Looking for a guaranteed monthly ticket. Lu Xiaoyi picked up the jade slip, scanned it with his divine sense, and sighed in his heart. After 200 years of undercover work in the upper realm of Zhou, he finally had a preliminary understanding of the application of luck by the people of Zhou. He was no longer as confused as before. These things were really nothing to him, because ever since the day he started cultivating, he had never stopped studying this thing in his mind. From being completely helpless when he was chi refinement to being able to freely control the form of a big bird, he had walked the process for nearly 600 years. The key was that he had an advantage over the people of Zhou. The cultivators of Zhou used their own original luck, while he used 3 aspects. His own luck plus the fragment of fate plus countless swallowing. They were both learning these things, but what he learned and what the slug learned were 2 completely different things. He was learning as a doctor, while the slug was purely learning as a junior high school student. What he could do after he finished learning would be completely different. However, he couldn't say it out loud. This wasn't to deceive a friend, but to protect his privacy. At worst, he could just keep an eye on this guy in the core of the Sea of Stars. Looking at the slug, Lu Xiaoyi took a deep breath. Snot! Are you setting your future Tao realm on fate? The slug didn't avoid it, and nodded firmly. Yes, I've been thinking about this for a long time. It's not because fate has collapsed and the great Tao is empty. In fact, no matter which of the 36 innate great Taos I choose, it will be empty after this era. I know that setting it down now is a joke. Not to mention small gene Dan cultivators like us, even perfected Yuaning cultivators don't dare to say that they can truly set a Tao. Anyway, I heard that none of the 11 Yang spirit perfected cultivators in Qingwei have a real Tao direction. But I can have dreams. If I can take a small step in the direction of my dream when I become a nascent soul, it may be a big step in the future. This isn't confidence, but chasing dreams. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Slug, even I don't have dreams. You really dare to dream. But what you think now may not be what you will decide in the future. Just like marrying a wife, how many of a young man's dreams could be realized? He wanted to be a princess, but in the end, he married a hag. Slug glared at him angrily. Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. All right. It's always good to have a dream. What if it comes true? At the very least, it can be your spiritual support for reaching the nascent soul realm. What I want to know is, are you sure that you can get anything from the halo at the core of the universe? Not just to vent the frustration of being stuck in the upper realm? Slug's expression was firm. I know what I'm doing. You don't know, but ever since I sensed Qi, my Qi cluster has been especially strong. I didn't know before, but in the process of cultivation, there is always a light at the end of the tunnel. Be it for people, things, or opportunities. Later on, a perfected cultivator casually mentioned that my Qi cluster was stronger than ordinary cultivators, so I put extra effort in this aspect. Don't think that I'm good at snorting. It's just a technique. Lu Xiaoyi looked at his friend's head again. Slug proudly raised his head, as if he was dazzling the Qi cluster in his sea of consciousness. He knew that Lu Xiaoyi couldn't see it, but it was just a kind of self-expression consciousness. But what he didn't know was that Lu Xiaoyi could really see it. Looking at the ball of providence in the slug's sea of consciousness, which was indeed slightly more robust than an ordinary person's, he couldn't help but snicker in his heart. If your ball of providence is considered robust, then what about mine? Is it abnormal? Since you've thought it through, then I'll accompany you on this trip. But I'll say the ugly words first. If something happens in the halo, I'll do my best to help you. If you overestimate yourself and go to the shell or even deeper, don't blame me for being disloyal and not caring about you. The meaning of Lu Xiaoyi's words was related to a cultivator's rationality. Under normal circumstances, as the eldest senior brother of Jin Dan of the Qingwei immortal sect, it was impossible for Slug to lose his rationality. But people would change. Especially when they were at the end of their rope, there would always be evil thoughts that would occupy a cultivator's body and mind, causing them to do things that they wouldn't normally do. What Lu Shi had to be on guard was to let Slug know his attitude when he was trapped by his inner demon. This was the real help between friends, not patting one's chest and doing everything. Of course, Slug understood. He was very glad that he didn't choose the wrong person. Among them, this one was the most unruly, foul-mouthed, and unruly. But he also knew that this guy was the most reliable. You should practice more and familiarize yourself with the way to control chi cluster. I've been familiar with this for hundreds of years. You have to know that in the core of the star sea, the control of one's own chi cluster is far more useful than dharma power and soul swordsmanship. We're facing a mysterious celestial phenomenon, not an enemy like human beings. Your killing skills won't be of much use there. I'll make some preparations and strive to do the best I can in the early stage. The two of them stopped drinking and made their own preparations. Lu Xiaoyi grasped the contents of the jade scroll very quickly, but he did not expose it. There was no need for that. If he could compare the masses of fate with the jade scroll, the slug would be so ashamed that he would not be able to show his face. He didn't have a fixed goal for the Tao realm he would choose when he broke through to the nascent soul realm. At least, he thought that the choice of Tao realm before he broke through to the nascent soul realm should serve the nascent soul realm, instead of aiming too high for the Tao integration stage. In this regard, he was a typical practical person. Even if it was the acquired Tao, as long as he thought it was suitable and beneficial to the nascent soul realm, he would do it without hesitation. He was very picky when it came to swordsmanship, but in other aspects, he was agreeable. This wasn't his forte, so going with the flow was his best choice. As for the Tao integration stage, it wouldn't be too late to think about it when he became a half-deity. He had a strong foundation in the Tao of Fate, but even so, he didn't fix his choice of Tao realm on fate. Similarly, his 5 elements ability was the best among the Jin Dan cultivators of the same level, so he didn't treat the 5 elements as his only choice of Tao realm. What was the hurry? There would always be something that was most suitable for him. Half a month later, Slug's preparations were complete. He prepared 2 sets of tools that might be used, one for each of them. This was all he could do for his friend who was going on an adventure with him. He had never been to that place before, so everything was just an idea in his mind. No one knew what would happen, so he didn't want to drag his friend down. The two of them went out of the mountain gate and flew toward the entrance of the crack. They would go through the crack to the little continent, which was the closest to the core of the star sea. After that they would fly with their physical bodies. Along the way, Lu Xiaoyi chattered endlessly. Is there anyone who breaks through like you? You should at least go to the periphery a few times to feel out the situation, so you can be mentally prepared. Hundreds of years of Jin Dan cultivation, I think you've been cultivating for nothing. This was just a joke. They were very clear that in the cultivation world, many things in the unseen world only existed for the first time. It was also the last time. It wasn't something that could be obtained by repeatedly weighing the pros and cons. Opportunities were incomparably wonderful. Chapter 938. P.S. Looking for a guaranteed monthly ticket. A month later, the two of them arrived at the little land of Xianjin. They did not stay for long. The highest level cultivator in this small land was only at the foundation establishment stage. After identifying the direction, they flew toward the Sea of Clouds. In fact, the direction was no longer important at this place. Even on the little land of Xianjin, they could clearly feel the pressure from the star sea's core. The deeper they flew, the less people there were, until they could no longer sense the aura of a single cultivator. Cultivators have never stopped exploring the star sea's core, especially the rogue cultivators. They don't have an accurate understanding of this place, and always hope that a miracle will happen here. There are thousands of cultivators, and there are many who live on the edge of their blades. However, in this period of time, there are much fewer people here. The slug explained as he flew. It seemed that he had put in a lot of effort into the star sea's core. The sea of clouds became even denser, as if it had substance. It hung on his body as he moved, sticky, giving him an uncomfortable feeling. Lu Xiaoyi did not quite agree with the slug's judgment. There might be fewer people coming to the star sea's core because no one is in the mood to study it. However, there will be more people fighting for their lives. They might not wander around outside, but they will definitely go in without hesitation. Especially people like you who are at the end of their rope. The slug sighed. He knew that his friend was right. In the Zhou Xian upper realm, any normal cultivator would understand the meaning of the star sea's core. A place like this that had not been explored was in line with the cultivator's desire to find treasures. Even a newcomer like Lu Xiaoyi's first impression was that there must be something special here. How could the natives not feel it? When a cultivator was at the end of their rope, they would not hesitate to try even if there was only a slight possibility. The star sea's core was also the largest cultivator cemetery in the Zhou Xian upper realm. A month later, the speed of the two of them had dropped to an extremely low level, even lower than that of the building foundation stage. The environment around them was already in a half-liquid and half-gas state. In such an environment, no flying boat could pass through it. There was no other way except for flying with their bodies. A belt of light appeared in front of him. It looked like a ring, but it actually covered the entire core of the Sea of Stars without any gaps. Slug slowed down again. Ear, try to use your luck to control the escape technique outside. Everything else, including the release of the flying swords, must be done according to the method of destiny in the Jade Slip. Once you're familiar with it, we can go in. Although the slug's decision was very bold, he was very cautious. This was a necessary psychological quality for him to be able to reach this step. Every outstanding cultivator was similar in some aspects. The two of them stopped in front of the halo. Changing the way of controlling the body with the soul that they had used for hundreds of years into the control of luck, it was the key to whether they could enter and exit the halo safely. Say, do you think the true monarchs discovered the secrets of the Star Sea before or after the collapse of the Great Tao of Destiny? Lu Xiaoyi felt that this was a critical moment that would determine his control over the providence. It should have happened after the Grand Tao of Destiny collapsed, right? I'm not sure. However, it seems that they gained very little from their previous explorations. After the collapse of the Grand Tao of Destiny, some of the rules were loosened, and the human cultivators took advantage of this opportunity. Theoretically speaking, that should be the case. Slug analyzed. After circling the halo for a full month and adapting to the control of his body under the control of the Providence, Slug stopped pacing around on this day. I'm ready, Lu Xiaoyi replied. The coffin is ready. The sooner I die, the sooner I can reincarnate. Caution was necessary. Excessive caution would affect one's confidence, and hesitation for too long would breed cowardice. On this point, Slug was very careful. Lu Xiaoyi didn't know what Slug was going to do. The difference between the orthodoxies was like heaven and earth, and he couldn't give any advice on the specific steps. Here, he was only a bystander, watching his friend succeed or collect his corpse. Do you have any other reminders? Slug was about to go in. Lu Xiaoyi didn't hesitate. Yes, I do. You can leave the storage rings that store your worldly possessions. I don't mind if they're broken and tattered. Also, I'll take care of my daughter-in-law. The slug made a disdainful gesture and flew away without turning its head. Ear, you cheated me of 1,000 spirit stones. I'll always remember this. The two entered the halo one after the other. As soon as they entered, they immediately felt that part of their bodies was out of control. There was a powerful force pulling them in. This was only part of the halo. The deeper they went, the stronger the pulling force. They just didn't know how strong the shell would be. To deal with this kind of pulling force, the most foolish method was to use one's cultivation to resist it. The more one resisted, the stronger the pulling force would be. The stronger the pulling force, the deeper they went. The deeper they went, the harder they would be to resist it. It was an endless cycle. The correct method was to relax the body and let the providence in the sea of consciousness control the body. They would go with the flow and look for ups and downs in the pulling force. It was like hitting the water in the middle of a wave. When the tide rose, they would go with it. When the tide fell, they would retreat. This kind of control was not unfamiliar to the two of them. After months of practice, strong comprehension, and talent, it was not difficult for top Jean Dan like them. Slug seemed to be aimlessly flying in circles in front of them. At the same time, he continued to go deeper into the halo. Lu Xiaoyi followed behind him a few miles away. He could not disturb Slug. Slug had begun to immerse himself in his own world, and outsiders could no longer interfere. A few miles was a very close distance for Jean Dan. In normal space, they should be further away, but Lu Xiaoyi could not do it. The halo was almost a full liquid environment. The effect of the soul was extremely limited here. Vision was even worse. He could only rely on his providence to sense things. As powerful as he was, a few miles was his limit. At such a distance, Slug could not sense where his friend was behind him. However, he believed that Lu Xiaoyi must be beside him. This fact could only mean one thing. The ability of this ear was far above his. It was very impressive. What worried Lu Xiaoyi was that he found traces of other human cultivators in the halo. He did not know how they wandered here. The only thing he knew was that the level of their magic power was rapidly decreasing. They could not last long here. In the jade slip given to him by Slug, this was clearly written. With the shell of the star as the red line, if there were cultivators outside the halo, they would have a chance to leave before their magic power was exhausted. However, if they passed through the shell of the star, they would not have a chance to leave. Using the power of providence could help the two of them stay in the halo for a long time. This was the difference. Chapter 939. P.S. Looking for a guaranteed monthly ticket. Lu Xiaoyi knew that the slug's attempt here didn't necessarily mean that he was going to break through to the nascent soul realm. He might strike while the iron was hot, or he might go out and break through to the nascent soul realm after gaining some enlightenment. His role was to follow him and deal with him when someone disturbed him. As for when the slug fell into some kind of secret danger due to his own reasons, he couldn't make much judgment. The upper realm of cultivators was a very contradictory process. From the success rate, one could see that the chances of failure were far greater than the chances of success. The danger was greater than the smoothness. Therefore, even if you knew that a cultivator would be in danger if he continued to break through, you couldn't stop him because he still had a chance of success. Just like when he was trying to form his gold core on Sand Planet. If someone had been guarding him and decided whether to stop him based on the degree of danger, he wouldn't have been able to form his Jean Dan. He would have been interrupted countless times with good intentions. 9 deaths and 1 life, 9 defeats and 10% chance of success. Cultivators were betting on this small probability. Lu Xiaoyi's ominous words weren't a joke. This was the only thing he could do. If he didn't want to take the normal path, he would have to bear extra pressure. He was just joking to remind the slug of what he was doing. In the upper realm of cultivators, there were those who were willing to venture alone. There were also those who were willing to be protected by their masters and elders. There were also those who were willing to stay in a safe place within the sect. There were also those who preferred nature and went with the flow. Only obedient children needed the protection of their elders. Outstanding people like them had long been used to being alone. They weren't willing to accept other people's advice when breaking through to the next realm, even if it was out of good intentions. This was the good thing about finding friends. While getting rid of external interference, they wouldn't interfere with the specific process of breaking through, even if it was a dead end. Even if it was a dead end, there was still a chance of survival. Collecting corpses wasn't a joke. The slug really didn't have much time left. From the time they met, he had been in Jean Dan. At the age of 500, he was in his prime. However, 200 years later, the same person had become a dead end. A truly aggressive cultivator wouldn't risk their life when their lifespan was exhausted. That was a passive struggle. Now, he was taking the initiative. The direction of his will was completely different. As he followed, he occasionally brushed shoulders with other cultivators. What surprised him was that a few of them clearly used some kind of application of luck. They were not aimlessly courting death here, but had something to rely on. Human beings were the wisest of all creatures. Their wisdom and exploratory spirit were incomparable to that of other species. There were also countless talents among the 3,000 unorthodox groups. It was perfectly normal that some of them had figured out the secret of traveling at the center of the universe. Nothing could be hidden forever. The only thing lacking was that these people's use of providence could not be compared to the collective wisdom of the upper sect perfected lords. It was rather crude and simple. Everyone who came here had one thing in common, and that was to do their best to climb up. When they could not come up with a better solution after racking their brains, it was their common choice to venture into the center of the universe despite the great risks. He was not the only one who was paying attention to the mystery of fate. In fact, there were thousands of cultivators in the Shou-Hsien upper realm who would not pay attention to the things that were closely related to each cultivator. 3 months later, the slug that had finished brewing began to enter again. Lu Xiaoyi did not remind him again. Every cultivator had the right to choose their own destination. The boundary between the halo and the star's shell was not flat and quiet. It was a bit like the ion storm on the surface of the stars in his previous life. It exploded, raged, and never stopped. However, what was emitted here was not rays. Instead, it was faint and mysterious things, such as the power of fate. The slug's target was the vortex-shaped mass of fate on the star's shell. Its structure was extremely unstable, and there was no pattern to its strength. Sometimes it was still, sometimes it was gushing. The slug slowly moved towards the center of the whirlpool. Seeing this, even the brave Lu Xiaoyi couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat for him. Jin Dan cultivators could not control the power of fate other than their bodies. Not to mention Jin Dan cultivators, even Yuanying and perfected lords could not do it. That was an ability that only half-immortals could come into contact with, and they could use it to get closer to the path of unification. In the Jin Dan period, there was not even a decent fate-type cultivation technique, because the level did not allow it. The slug did not want to rely on fate-type cultivation techniques to reach the upper realm. He just wanted to use the violent fluctuations of fate to provide an excuse for his upper realm. Simply put, it was like a set of spiritual medicine. The main ingredients were still the things from the Qingwei immortal sect, but he wanted to use the operation of fate as a catalyst to pry open the beginning of the entire process of reaching the upper realm. It was a very clever idea, a very cunning borderline Tao state. As for how effective it would be, only the heavens would know. After the slug sat in the vortex, he closed his eyes tightly and did not move. As for how he would pry open the fate as a catalyst, that was not something that Lu Xiaoyi should be concerned about. He had his own things to do. He came here to help his friends, to explore the secrets of Zhou Xian's fate, which was his mission as a spy. As for the third, he actually wanted to see it for himself. Other than being 100 years younger than the slug, in terms of situation, he was not much better than the slug. Similarly, he was confused about his upper realm and the direction of his future Tao orthodoxy. Fate was a direction, so was the 5 elements, and the stars. These 3 elements, 2 of which were innate and 1 of which was acquired, had occupied an extremely important position in his 600 years of cultivation. Fate and stars had accompanied him from the beginning to the end, and they had never left him for a single day. However, he always had a feeling that these 3 elements did not seem to be the direction of his future Tao state. A cultivator's feeling was very important, because once you had such a feeling, it meant that on a mysterious level, there was something that was more suitable for you. Then, what was it? He could not think of it. There were 36 innate great Taos, and there were countless unorthodox paths involved. It was really funny that he, a mere Jean Dan cultivator, was thinking about it here. However, there was something that he had to consider. Not to mention that his future cultivation was closely related to this choice. Even the upper realm would be of great help to him if he made the right choice. Following one's heart was the best excuse, but the problem was that he did not even know where his heart was. His swordsmanship was tyrannical, but his cultivation was weak, and he could do nothing about it. Therefore, he also wanted to come here and take a look. The slug had seen through this and invited him. There were no fools in the cultivation world. Who would be willing to put in effort and not get anything in return? The best of both worlds was the way to get along with friends. Although he had not left the slug's range of several miles, he still began to try. The slug could rely on the method in the jade slip to place himself on the star's shell, which was in the vortex of fate that was just a stone's throw away. The ability of his ear in terms of fate was completely different from the slug's. What reason did he have not to go further? The star's halo was not a threat to him at all, but what about the star's shell? Chapter 940. There was plenty of time, enough for him to keep trying. In view of the stellar core's illustrious reputation in the Zhou Xian upper realm, his attempts were cautious and careful. He approached the other vortexes, the quiet ones, the violent ones, and the erupting ones. He left as soon as he touched them, and did not linger. He felt the changes in the strength of the fate as well as the influence it had on his own control. He became familiar with it as he tried, and gradually gained control over it. In the past few days he had traveled back and forth countless times. He had accumulated enough experience, and was ready to go one step further. He looked at the slug. It was motionless there like a dead person. He sighed and his body suddenly sank. He did not choose a quiet surface. Instead, he chose a place with an intense eruption. This was a cultivator's intuition. Quiet meant hidden undercurrents. Intense, on the other hand, meant that the accumulated energy was being released. It went without saying which one was truly safe. The stellar shell was not a hard shell like the chicken shell. It was actually a layer of soft membrane of unknown thickness. It was half solidified. Once a person was immersed in it, it was as if the fate of the entire universe was pressing down on him like a mountain. He was not flustered. He knew that he could not resist it directly. He just went with the flow and treated himself as a part of this mountain-like fate. He integrated into it, and did not treat himself as an outsider. The big bird in the sparrow palace flapped its wings and gradually synchronized with the fluctuation of fate in the stellar shell. When he achieved this, he regained control of his body. He did not hesitate and came out of the shell. He carefully recalled the soul-stirring changes in this short period of time. He knew that if he resisted even a little bit, he would immediately fall into a hopeless situation of death. The distance between life and death was so close, but it did not affect his mind. This was within his expectations. He had never fully understood the realm core and the Zhou Xian upper realm. In theory, this should be a pure celestial phenomenon that pulled Zhou Xian over 3,000 continents of various sizes in the upper realm. There was nothing to explore. However, after the collapse of the Great Path of Destiny several hundred years ago, this realm core seemed to have undergone an inexplicable change. To put it simply, it was possible that a huge fragment of destiny had fallen into the realm core, resulting in the various changes that followed. It was not the first time he had encountered such a situation where the mass of providence had fused with nature. On planet Hasa, there had been a mutation. Now, in the upper realm of Zhou Xian, the effect of the change was even more subtle. Even the people of Zhou Xian could see their own providence. But what did this mean? What did it have to do with him? What could he gain from it? Lu Xiaoyi didn't try to swallow anything. He was an ant, and the power of destiny here was like an elephant. He was afraid that if he really swallowed it, his stomach would burst. Once he established a connection with the providence here, He was afraid that he would be drawn into some uncontrollable category and eventually lose himself. Moreover, he didn't think that having too much providence would be of any benefit to him now. What he needed to do now was to be prepared. At least he had the ability to freely enter and exit the star's shell. That would be enough. Next, he continued to enter and exit the surface of the star's shell and gradually adapted to this change. He didn't know how far the upper realm cultivators who had come here before could go, but he knew that he was just a Jean Dan. He would only do things within the scope of Jean Dan's abilities. He wouldn't cross the line, and he didn't have the heart to explore the secrets of the star's flesh. So what if he did? Being here, he didn't have the slightest feeling of finding the direction of the Great Path. Therefore, he knew that among the three choices he had, destiny was not his cup of tea. He was a little bored. He was in the land of opportunity of the big fragment of destiny, but he wasn't a demigod. He couldn't comprehend anything more profound. He was like a child who had walked into the Imperial College. Not only the providence, but also the shackles of the entire upper realm of Zhou Xian on the star core. It wasn't something he could deeply understand, a terrible and wrong environment for nascent soul formation. This was his judgment. If he were to choose, he wouldn't be so unrealistic. He could be ambitious, but he had to take it one step at a time. Jean Dan wanted to play with Jean Dan's things, but if you wanted to look at demigod's things, you would end up being a person with big eyes and a small belly, like the moon in the water. It wasn't completely useless. At the very least, it made him more familiar with the use of the sparrow god's providence in his sea of consciousness. In the future, whether it was stealing from others or defending against them, he would have more experience. It wasn't a bad place to practice swordsmanship. In his past battles, he rarely had the chance to use the sword's spirit of the luck cutter. This was because most of his opponents had not come into contact with such a profound aspect. But now, using the luck cutter to destroy the providence storm on the surface of the star's shell was also an excellent opportunity to practice. Lu Xiaoyi couldn't stop himself from eating **tea. He was bored and used this place as a place to practice his swordsmanship. Time passed quietly like this. Finally, there was some movement from the slug. This made Lu Xiaoyi sigh. In fact, he didn't want his friend to break through in this place. He had made it very clear before, but it could only be a suggestion. From his observation, he couldn't be sure how the providence medicine would enhance the slug's nascent soul formation. The only thing he could be sure of was that the slug had chosen the direction of yin and yang for its nascent soul formation. Hum and ha belonged to the category of yin and yang. This made him heave a sigh of relief. This guy wasn't stupid. He knew what was most suitable for him now. The guiding medicine was destiny, the main medicine was yin and yang, and the 5 elements were supplements. It was a very clever and cunning strategy. Lu Xiaoyi had no choice but to control his range of activity. If he were to remain silent, it would be difficult for anyone to discover his presence due to the limited detection range of cultivators due to the environment of the star halo. However, if he were to make any noise, there was no guarantee that no cultivators would be able to track him down. His first priority here was to make sure his friend wasn't disturbed. He understood the importance of this. A few more days passed, and the slug's nascent soul formation became more and more active. However, Lu Xiaoyi frowned. It wasn't because of the slug, but because there seemed to be a trace of something very strange mixed with the movement. After confirming that there was no mistake, he began to move in that direction. As long as he didn't leave the range of the slug, he carefully sorted out this strange anomaly. In the end, he concluded that it shouldn't be the random outburst of the providence storm on the surface of the star's shell. This was a regular occurrence. In other words, it might be man-made. He was faced with a choice. Should he go and see what was going on? Or should he wait here? If he went there, it would mean that his friend would lose his protection. If he stayed here, he couldn't be sure that there were human cultivators in the area where the anomaly occurred. Would they find him because of the slug's nascent soul formation? If he could detect others, others could definitely detect the slug. Sitting and waiting wasn't Lu Xiaoyi's style. He preferred to take the initiative. If he waited for someone to find him and a fight broke out, how could he guarantee that his friend wouldn't be disturbed in such a small space? He could only take the initiative to find him. As for the slug, he could only rely on his luck to see if anyone else would find him. He was alone, and he couldn't split himself. Chapter 941. Lu Xiaoyi began to move slowly, trying his best to hide his presence. He allowed others to discover the slug, but it would be best if they didn't discover him. Only then would he be able to influence the direction of the upcoming events. He had a great advantage in this environment. His advantage came from the fact that he could crush others with his destiny. In a normal space, he could rely on his divine sense to see further than others, but he couldn't use his sword. His opponents couldn't discover him, but he could in this space. He had communicated with the slug before. After his divine sense and vision failed, he could only rely on his destiny to search. This guy could discover him within a mile of him. And he could lock onto him from a distance of nearly 10 miles. This was an unparalleled advantage. He firmly believed that if the other party was a Jin Dan, he could almost completely control their life and death. They might not even discover his presence after he killed them. If the other party was a Yuanying, he still had a chance to sense further than the other party. All he needed to do was to move quietly. Following the trace of abnormality, Lu Xiaoyi dived for nearly 100 miles. His perception became clearer. There were 3 people 10 miles away. And they were on the planet's shell. Lu Xiaoyi stopped at the maximum range of his perception. He quietly watched and judged through the tentacles of his destiny. Slowly he frowned. This was a little tricky. The 3 of them should be monks. As for whether they belonged to the 2 major Buddhist sects, it was difficult to judge. In the upper realm of Zhouxian, there were many Buddhist sects in Little Land. The monks all looked the same, so it was difficult to distinguish them. His advantage was that he could discover the monks, but the monks couldn't discover him. His problem was that he was a Jin Dan, but the 3 monks were bodhisattvas. He had killed a lot of Yuanying, but he had never killed a bodhisattva. He didn't know how it would feel to kill one. He still didn't move. The worst thing was that even if he was 100 miles away from the slug, he could still vaguely feel the movements this guy was making. Couldn't he just be quiet? Why did he have to make such a big scene? Did he think he was at Mount Qingwei? He wanted to know what these 3 bodhisattvas were doing here. He was definitely not here to drink tea and talk about Buddhism. There must be some unspeakable secret. Lu Xiaoyi decided to take the risk and move closer. The distance was still too far for him to accurately determine what the bodhisattvas were doing. Slowly, he closed the distance to 8 kilometers, then 7 kilometers. At this position, he could clearly sense that he couldn't get any closer. Through the tentacles of providence, after observing for a moment, he finally discovered what they were doing. The 3 bodhisattvas were transporting fate. Was luck something that could be moved? In any case, Lu Xiaoyi could not do it. He believed that the Taoists could not do it either. The reason why the Buddhists were able to do so was because they had a mysterious tool to move things around, the power of faith. He could imagine that in the ascetic Zen continent of 10,000 Buddhas, or in the other small Buddhist continents, there must be some large-scale Buddhist event being held right now, and the power of faith gathered there was secretly stealing luck from the star core. Where did it go? Was there a need to think about it? Fifth Ring, Azure Sky, or some other place he didn't know. He once again confirmed the fact that the mastermind behind the transfer of fate in the upper realm of Zhouxian was the Buddhists. Presumably, this kind of teleportation was not for free, nor was it generosity. Instead, it was an act with a purpose. The power of providence that was teleported to other realms of the universe was lifeless and hidden in the minds of the cultivators, but they could be controlled. Because the source of the power of fate was here. Once a certain time window was reached, those who had received the transfer of fate would become the puppets of the Buddhists in Zhou to a certain extent. That must be it. The next thing he had to figure out was how the monks were able to control such a powerful fate in the Star Core. This would have to be done slowly. At his current level, he couldn't understand too much for now. These bald donkeys were really troublesome. After figuring out what the bodhisattvas were doing, Lu Xiaoyi did not intend to kill them. He was not a murderer, and killing people without a need was meaningless. Figuring out the truth was far more important than killing the 3 monks. Moreover, he might not be able to kill them anyway. The slug was at a critical stage, and it was not good to cause trouble. But just because he didn't want to cause trouble, it didn't mean that the monks were blind and deaf. The 3 bodhisattvas obviously sensed something. They stopped moving the fate and waited for a moment. Then, one of them began to slowly move in the slug's direction. The worst-case scenario had happened. That guy had made too much noise and finally attracted the attention of the 3 bodhisattvas. However, Lu Xiaoyi could also guess that with their relatively slow senses, they shouldn't be the bodhisattvas from the 2 major Buddhist sects, right? Lu Xiaoyi made a prompt decision. Which one should he kill first? The one who was moving toward the slug? Or the 2 who were left behind? Only the right choice would lead to the perfect result. In this regard, he had never made a wrong choice. The Fate Cutter flying sword quietly floated up. It was extremely slow, completely moving according to the intermittent outbursts of the Star Core's fate. It made people not feel that it was a flying sword at all. They would only think that it was a wisp of fate, just like the countless amounts of fate around it. This was the result of Lu Xiaoyi's practice over the past few days, and it was about to be put to use. His target was the 2 bodhisattvas who were continuing to move the fate. The logic was simple. The one who set out must have the strongest combat power, and was very vigilant, so it would not be easy to sneak up on him. The other 2 were much more relaxed. As long as he made a move, the bodhisattva who set out would definitely come back to help, and the battlefield would be further away from the slug. The flying sword moved silently, following the eruption of fate in the semi-solid membrane of the Star Core. The Grim Reaper was quietly descending. The red leaf bodhisattva's hand seals were endless. One of the 3 had left, so the rest of the task was more important. The power of faith was not infinite, and it could only last for a limited time. When the power of faith disappeared, their transportation would lose its meaning. Therefore, they had to take advantage of the abundant power of faith to move more. The power of faith was the boat, and they were now the porters. Among the 3, he didn't agree to look for the anomaly. It was irrelevant, and there was no need to complicate things. Maybe it would disappear naturally after some time, so it was not a big deal. However, the other 2 bodhisattvas thought that it was better to take a look, because their current actions were not in line with the agreement with the Taoists. The transportation of fate was restricted. This was the agreement reached by the 2 Buddhist sects and the 7 Taoist sections. However, since the collapse of the Great Tao, the Buddhist sects began to secretly increase their arrangements. It was not good for the 2 Buddhist sects to show up, as they were too big of a target. Therefore, they could only entrust the small Buddhist sects to complete the transportation. This was the reason why they had to be sneaky and take a look whenever they encountered an anomaly. 2 people had to do the work of 3 people, so they could only do it hastily. Moreover, they were not the bodhisattvas of the 2 Buddhist sections. Their cultivation was weaker, they had less experience, and they were not completely used to it. When a ball of fate exploded, the red leaf bodhisattva grabbed it without hesitation. He felt a pain in his heart. Chapter 942. The commotion caused by a ball of Tao dispelling celestial phenomenon was much greater than the bodhisattva's moving fate and the slug bug's breakthrough. The remaining 2 bodhisattvas had different reactions. The bodhisattva who was also moving fate had no idea what was going on. Although it was close, due to the raging Providence storm, Fate Cutter, which had disguised itself as a wisp of Providence, did not attract his attention. The flying sword was restrained in his body, and the perfect timing did not expose the true nature of the flying sword. His first reaction was that his companion's inability to control fate caused a backlash. This was also a possibility. This was the wrong reaction of a cultivator who did not fight often when encountering sudden changes. It was a short time, but it was enough to cause the next tragedy. The Bodhisattva who set out to look for abnormalities was very sensitive. He immediately realized that his companion had been attacked. Then, as Lu Xiaoyi predicted, he decisively returned to help. The whole sneak attack was within the ambusher's expectations. Before the Bodhisattva returned, he felt a strong Tao dispelling impact in the process. His heart sank to the bottom. There was a Yuanying ambushing them. The Yuanying was stronger than them, because he could detect them from a farther distance. Ambushers, strong enemies, enemies in the dark, all kinds of unfavorable situations occurred in an instant. He needed to make the most correct judgment. Like two submarines in the deep sea, they were fighting a battle of wits and courage when they could not see each other. As expected of the most experienced of the three, the remaining Bendu Bodhisattva turned back again and entered stealth mode, still moving toward the abnormal location. He knew very well that in such an environment where his perception was below the enemy's, it would be foolish of him to take the initiative to search. If the enemy was willing, he would never be able to find them, but he could be within the enemy's attack range at any time. No one would be willing to be in such a passive state. Therefore, he looked for the one he could sense. This was to force the enemy to show up. He felt that there should be two people. One was weak and deliberately exposed flaws, and the other was strong and responsible for the sneak attack. After Lu Xiaoyi killed the second Bodhisattva, he suddenly felt that the Bodhisattva who was returning to help had disappeared. His perception range was within 10 miles. If the Bodhisattva was returning at full speed, he could sense further. But if the Bodhisattva was in stealth mode, which direction would he go? Would he run toward him? Or the slug? There was no need to think about it. He could only choose to save his friends. If any of them ran away, he could only let them go. He couldn't completely ignore the slug and play a secret battle here as he pleased. If the Bodhisattva was smart enough and chose to move closer to the slug, he would be at a disadvantage because the Bodhisattva was closer to the slug. If he wanted to stop Bodhisattva, he had to speed up. In other words, he would lose the advantage of having a longer detection range due to the large movement when he accelerated. To a swordsman like him who was only at the level of a Jin Dan, this was very dangerous. In all his glorious battles with cultivators at the level of Yuanying, without exception, he was always the one who made the first move, preventing his opponent from unleashing their full potential. What would it mean if a powerful Bodhisattva made the first move? Since he had been entrusted with the task, he couldn't let him down. From the beginning, they each had their own ulterior motives to the current quarrel. In fact, it was a process of deepening their friendship. If the Bodhisattva met with misfortune while breaking through, he wouldn't feel any psychological pressure because that was the end of a cultivator. However, if the Bodhisattva failed to protect the Bodhisattva, it would be his fault as a friend. There was no other way. After the Bodhisattva found the slug, the Bodhisattva would definitely die in his current state. He didn't even dare to bet with the Bodhisattva on who would be the first to return, because the bet was his friend's life. Less than 100 miles was a very short distance for them. He didn't have time to hesitate. Since he couldn't be sneaky anymore, he would go for the big Dafa. Lu Xiaoyi raised his speed to the maximum. At the same time, he urged the big bird of the Sparrow Palace. As he flapped his wings, the power of fate resonated with the Star Core's fate, setting off a surging storm of fate, crushing the Bodhisattva back just like that. His goal was very simple. He wanted to use the power of a monk who had 2 strikes and the majestic power of fate to make the last Bodhisattva wary. It would be best if the Bodhisattva thought that he was a Yuanying cultivator and scared him away. At the very least, it would affect the Bodhisattva's judgment and make him hesitate. It was a good idea. Most people who weren't calm enough, weren't strong enough, and weren't experienced enough would definitely fall into his trap. However, Bendu Bodhisattva wasn't an ordinary monk. He was the leader of the three, and was also very famous in the Buddhist circle in Zhou. He was a sweeping monk who specialized in doing the dirty work when it was inconvenient for the two major Buddhist sects to attack. He had fought countless battles in his life, was very experienced, and was shrewd and ruthless. Instead, he saw a trace of weakness in Lu Xiaoyi's actions. In Bendu Bodhisattva's perception, the distance of the abnormality now was about the same as the distance of the cultivator who risked his life to return to help. Of course, there was no need to consider which one to choose. The abnormality wasn't worth mentioning. Only the one who returned to help was the real opponent. Once he killed the abnormal cultivator, the one who returned to help would follow him stealthily. Where would he find him then? To solve a problem, of course, he had to solve the most troublesome and the biggest threat. Without chanting or speaking the Buddhist language, he waved his fist, and a Vajradharma form left his body. It was only the size of a human child, but its body was as solid as Vajra, as if it was real. It wasn't affected by the environment here at all and charged towards the churning fate. This was the foundation of Bendu Bodhisattva. He didn't cultivate the Buddhist kingdom, and wasn't good at Dharma. When he fought, he relied on the 8 great Vajra boys that he had cultivated all his life: Light Net, Earth Wisdom Tower, Undefiled Light, Unthinkable Wisdom, Please Summon, Bun Nun, First Aid Wisdom, and Wu Bo Bun Nun. Each of the 8 great Vajra boys had their own uses. They basically covered all aspects of Buddhism. They were immersed in it all their lives, and their realms were extremely high. Among them, Light Net, Earth Wisdom Tower, Undefiled Light, Bun Nun, and Wu Bo Bun Nun all had powerful offensive abilities. In terms of offensive forms, they were a little similar to the Dharma form of a body cultivator, but they were much more extensive and profound than the body meridian inheritance. For example, the first one he attacked this time was the Undefiled Light. It was the most suitable in such an environment. As an Undefiled Light, it could cut fate and travel back and forth. It was incomparably sharp. As soon as the Undefiled Light left his body, Lu Xiaoyi already felt it. Not only this Vajra boy, but also Bendu Bodhisattva himself. The swordsman's philosophy was that since you attacked, I had to counterattack no matter what. However, there was a prerequisite for this, and that was to leap up and use evasion to deal with the opponent's attack. Using flying swords to test the opponent's defense was a concept that wasn't suitable in the current environment. Because here, he couldn't escape. When the control of his body was changed to the control of the power of fate, he gained a longer range of detection, but he lost the ability of his body to fly. If he couldn't dodge that Vajra boy with evasion, his own defense wouldn't be able to withstand it no matter what. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.